Hello everyone, this video is a follow-up to my original Lies of P video that came out last year. Will be in the description, by the way. This video is going to differ quite a bit from that original video, and in several ways. The original video was commentary layered over a start-to-finish playthrough of the base game, with various topics coming and going throughout the video while we talked about various levels and bosses as they came up. This video will be just a tiny bit more organized compared to that, as I'll be sticking to topics all the way through while vaguely relevant footage from the base game will pass by. This should go without saying, but this video will contain spoilers for Lies of P's Overture DLC. There will also be some talk of other games like Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree and the first Berserker Kazan, although there won't be any footage of them on screen. As a bit of a disclaimer, the footage you'll see throughout the video is made from a combination of two different save files. One was a base game DLC playthrough where I was using the Rapier Long Spear combo the entire time. The other was done on a specific New Game Plus 2 file I used exclusively for boss rematches. So anytime you see me using any weapon that isn't the Rapier Long Spear, just remember that you're watching a level 213 character at the start of New Game Plus 2. Without further ado, let's get started. We'll begin with level design. Level design was alright in the base game, and level design in the DLC continues to also be alright. The DLC's levels are a marked improvement over many of the base game ones in ways we'll get to momentarily, but there's no level here that's truly remarkable in the same way that some of the best levels in the FromSoft games are. There's no Stormveil Castle, Shadow Keep, or Grand Archives tier content here. Most of the new levels still tend to be very linear checkpoint relays cut by the occasional shortcut with not much optional side content to speak of. Linear level design in the base game was something I ended up really appreciating across my 22 plus playthroughs of it. I like keeping a spreadsheet to obsessively track all of my playthroughs. I haven't replayed the DLC anywhere near as much as I have the base game, so I can't speak of how effective I find the linearity of the DLC levels to be, but regardless, more of the same is something I can't really criticize the DLC for when it ended up being a strong point for the base game. One thing Overture's levels do better than the base game by quite a margin is visuals, both in terms of concepts and variety. There's a lot of cool stuff to look at throughout the various levels, and you aren't trudging through several different city levels to do so. While the base game isn't without its visual variety throughout levels, on the whole, I think Overture's levels are a lot more interesting to walk through and memorable in the long run. You can already see this from the very beginning with Overture's first major level, Krat Zoo. This and the extended carnival section are probably the best new levels in the game. There is so much visual and enemy variety going from the Hall of Adventure, Jungle Walkway, Savannah Experience Center leading up to the showdown at the heart of the greenhouse. The assortment of mutated carcass animals are very cool to look at and a lot of fun to fight. The Elephant Chimera mini-boss on the way to the Savannah Experience Center is disgusting, putrid, monstrous, cool as fuck, and so creative. It was a complete supervillain on launch and was easily one of the most difficult encounters in the game, harder than several of the base game bosses, but it seems like its powers were nerfed in a later patch. The world just isn't ready for elephant domination, it seems. The greenhouse was a really nice addition here too. The level switches from carcasses to puppets and goes from spacious displays of the zoo against carcasses to a lot of narrow hallways against puppets to provide a different kind of gameplay experience. The new puppet enemies here were very difficult for me on my first DLC playthrough, especially those on the ceiling walkways. As a side note, it is kind of weird to me that Frostbite is such a big deal in the lead up to the zoo and the early sections of it, what with the Winter's Sleep Amulet and the Elephant Chimera mini-boss, but then it just completely falls out of relevance afterwards outside of a tiny bit of it in a later level. There's not even a boss or weapon associated with it. I do think not having a winter-themed boss for a winter-themed DLC is a bit of a miss. Part of me wants to say, I wish we got a Frostbite weapon because that would be cool, but being able to slow down enemy action speed does sound pretty overpowered. The carnival is an extension of the zoo, but it's just as good, if not better. I like that the various minigames are actually worth the effort of doing. It makes finding and completing your first minigame feel really rewarding, and provides an incentive to continue interacting with other minigames you come across. The coins are scattered throughout the level, so there's a reason to peer into every corner and find other delightful secrets along the way. It's a fun level to explore as a result, and I also appreciate that it's pretty non-linear in design as long as you aren't gunning it for the Ferris wheel. I do wish this level had a carnival-themed mini-boss at the end though. It does feel a little empty to leave this place by simply walking out given how fun it is. I love the view of the carnival from both atop the Ferris wheel and on the tram out. There's something truly melancholy about seeing this whimsical place be so devoid of life. Riding the tram and being brought to Eventide Hotel Krot put a huge smile on my face when it first happened. In hindsight, I should have expected this because the hotel is in the fucking trailer, but somehow I blinked that part of the trailer out of my brain, I suppose. Anyways, I really like the atmosphere of the hotel. There's something very nice and relaxed about the whole place, almost like a calm before the storm. I also appreciate that the P-organ stuff is all downstairs and that you can use the gold coin tree here in order to do away with any unnecessary loading screens. The Zelator underground facility is pretty cool, but definitely a tier below the zoo and carnival, simply because those have a lot more going on in the visuals and enemy variety departments. I do think that Zelator is the best level in the game from a structural standpoint though. It's got a very disorienting layout since you're going through a lot of tiny rooms and corridors that loop into and around themselves alongside unexpected vertical exploration. The atmosphere is great thanks to you being able to hear periodic screams throughout the entire facility, which sets up really nice for the area boss. The Ancient Ruins excavation site is my least favorite level of the DLC. It's by far and away the visually least interesting part of Overture. It has some neat moments like being pelted by rocks while the alarms are blaring or following Alexander's chain of puppet transmissions. The excavation site feels like what the Relic of Trismegistus was supposed to be in the base game. That level always felt incomplete, and it didn't help that the boss at the end sucked. So it's cool to see the relic get the love that it probably deserved, since the story made it seem like a really important location. I do find it weird that the elevator that takes you to the relic in the base game takes you into Zelator instead in the DLC. If the excavation site and Zelator had switched places, then I don't think I would have thought twice about this. The coastline was also mostly whatever. The Aurora skybox is very pretty, but the cliffside leading into the shipwreck was rather unremarkable. I got really excited when I saw the Archon fleet shipwreck for the first time, but was sorely disappointed by how much time you spend inside small and dark rooms. It never felt like I was properly exploring a ship until the final stretch when you run across the top of one to get to the fishing village. I think I would have preferred one giant shipwreck instead of multiple smaller ones, like a big cruise liner that capsized with several floors to it. It is funny that the level hints at the possibility of branching paths at one point, with one stargazer taking you to a cave, while the other leads to the area boss. I was shocked by this at first because of the game's extreme linearity leading up to this point, and several streamers I watched were also similarly surprised by this. It's just unfortunate and hilarious that the cave doesn't lead to much other than a slightly bizarre encounter with the world's #1 Adelina Corday fan. The fishing village is small and completely insignificant, which was a shame. Climbing the lighthouse and seeing Rose Estate in the distance was cool though. The subsequent Pleroma cave run is also not great, since the enemy gauntlet with Leia got pretty tedious pretty quickly. I like her voice lines, but the gauntlet runs on for too long, and the combat here isn't interesting enough since it's just recycled enemies from start to finish. It was extra tedious on replays especially, which is why I'm grateful I don't have to experience it during boss rushes. At the very least, Leia actually puts out relevant damage numbers, unlike the Red Fox and Black Cat did back in Malum District. Monad Charity House is the final level, and I think it's mostly just alright. The introduction is great, the cutscene with Romeo's arms is quite the scene to behold, but I didn't find the level proper to be that interesting since I find the interior of both the cellar and the library to be kind of bland. It's not a particularly long level, nor are there any annoying sections, so I'm ultimately just lukewarm on the level as a whole. I do like the room with the upgraded police puppet in it that looks like a subway tunnel. It's a cool callback to the very beginning of the game. I also thought that the gates at the back of the Rose Garden would open up upon killing the DLC's final boss, but unfortunately, it did not. I know the things I said for the last few of those DLC levels sounded pretty negative, but I should clarify that I found those levels to be disappointing because of how strongly Overture began with the zoo, carnival, and even Zelator. The shipwreck, fishing village, and charity house aren't all that much when compared to the DLC's opening, but they're still head and shoulders above many of the base game levels in terms of visuals. I would say the only base game level that surpasses those last three on visuals would probably be the Grand Exhibition, which is my favorite level from the base game. The minimum bar for visuals and theming of levels in Overture is simply quite a bit higher than in the base game. Level design is a good segue into enemy variety, since the enemies present throughout a level are a defining part of a level's identity. One of the many strengths of the base game was its enemy variety. Almost every single level introduced several new enemies that challenged your mastery of the combat system in various ways, and I'm happy to report that the DLC continues this trend. Frankly, I was not expecting the DLC to add as much as they did, because the base game enemy variety was already so high. I figured they would take advantage of that and just recycle those enemies throughout the DLC. Would I have been okay with that? I don't know, but I don't think it would have been a deal breaker for me. There is enemy reuse in the DLC, but there's very little of this reuse that is just a straight up one-for-one copy of the base game. Reused enemies either return with additional moves or are a new twist on an old classic. The basic trash mob carcass enemies have a new jumping attack that I got hit by way too many times. The dogs in the DLC will howl for other dogs to come and join the party as if one dog wasn't already bad enough. Those headless puppets that attack 3 swipes at a time now have their heads back with a funny hat and dance in their free time before charging on sight. The Disruption spray gun enemies from the Arch Abbey now shoot ice, jump backwards, and are hugely obnoxious to fight. Even Parade Master is back in his full glory with the amazing change that he kills you in 2 hits now. A lot of base game elite enemies return in the DLC too, but oftentimes with a new coat of paint and more significant changes to their moves. The bodyguard puppets that patrol the sides of the Grand Exhibition are back, except they look completely different and now plant landmines throughout the fight. They put one of the big guys from Elysium Boulevard in the carnival, but now he has a huge box and does a big butt slam. The Jester is one of the surprises in the carnival tents, but now he juggles fire and will kill you 15 times. I know I'm overdoing it with the examples here, and anyone who's played the DLC will know that I could keep going, but I really do love every single one of these examples. Yes, it is simply enemy reuse with a twist, but it's the care that went into this reuse that makes me appreciate it so much. The additional moves given to so many different enemy types and the new designs for so many of them too. Certain attacks like the fire juggling or the landmines completely change how the fight has to be approached. When fighting these enemies, I easily recognized the familiar attacks, but I never got sick of seeing these reused enemies with how many of them were freshened up for Overture. It's enemy reuse done in a very smart way, I think. A very important component of this, and I cannot stress this enough, is that Overture came packed with a lot of brand new enemies alongside the swath of reused ones. It's a well-balanced mix of old and new that makes the reuse feel welcome. If the DLC were only full of these reused enemies, it probably would have worn thin on me after a while despite their excellent redesigns. There are quite a few fun new enemies added to the DLC. I love all of the new carcass animals at the zoo except for the random elephant roaming around in the Hall of Adventure, with my favorite of these being the giant gorilla. The ball and chain prisoner in Zelator should have had some more health and been turned into a proper mini-boss with his own named health bar. It reminds me a lot of Mad Clown Puppet from the base game, and I love that fight. Go check out speedrunners fighting this guy, by the way. The giant drill machine in the excavation site is pretty cool. I like that you can hit it from behind to speed up the fight in a way that doesn't feel super cheesy like chain backstabbing enemies in Dark Souls 1 was. Even the fish jumping out of the water and flopping on the ice between the shipwrecks is a cool twist to combat in that section. Same goes for the shark that jumps out of the whale carcass in the fishing village that kicked my ass in every imaginable way. Enemy variety and design throughout Overture is an absolute home run, and I am so happy to see that the base game's success on this front wasn't a fluke, and the developers really do understand the importance of enemy variety. As I said in the base video, having good enemy variety is important because it's the one source of gameplay variety that everyone is guaranteed to experience. You can put in all sorts of cool weapons and different tools in the game, but there's no guarantee the player will use them. Enemy variety ends up being the only real way to ensure gameplay variety across a myriad of different builds and player preferences, so it's great to see a developer embrace strong enemy variety. Let's talk about Overture from the more experiential side of things. That is to say, how the game presents itself to the player. In the original video, I stated right from the beginning that I won't be talking much about Lies of P story because I don't play these kinds of games for the story. This still somewhat holds true. A lot of people seem to love the story presented in Overture, which is great, and I don't want to take anything away from that, but for me, stories in these games have always melted into the background and have never really been the thing I take away from the games outside of very rare occasions. All of this is to say that, even as someone that does not particularly care for the stories in these kinds of games, Overture stands out to me because it made the effort to create a more cinematic experience. There's a lot of little things sprinkled throughout Overture to make your time spent in it just a little bit more dramatic and memorable. It's also easy to appreciate all of these little things because the base game doesn't do very much of it. The base game isn't without its moments. Things like The elegant music playing while the mad clown puppet is marching down the burning street, or seeing the exterior of the grand exhibition in all its glory for the first time are still very memorable moments for me, but after having experienced Overture, the base game does feel a bit sparse in this regard. So what are these little things that the DLC does to make the experience more cinematic? The first thing that really stuck with me as I went through Overture was the use of guided camera shots. The game will take the camera away from the player to frame shots from a certain perspective that the developers want you to see. This could be something as insignificant as the camera slightly shifting upwards to show some birds flying away, or it could be something a lot more noticeable, like the camera and controls being completely taken away from the viewer to frame a nice full shot of the zoo. My favorite examples of these were the camera zooming out to show off the carnival as you took the tram out, and the shot of the charity house in the distance from atop the lighthouse. Cool little ways to create some picturesque moments. I frankly did not expect Gemini to get as many lines as he did, and honestly I even thought they might not give him any new lines in the DLC and that he'd just be completely silent, but nope, he's got a lot to comment on, and you know what? Good for Gemini. I know he's got his fair share of haters, but I like the guy. I used to find him annoying as well, but maybe I've Stockholmed myself into enjoying his company. I have a hard time imagining playing through the story without the little guy throwing something out there every couple minutes. It's certainly a lot more flavorful than reading all of those lore items. I did make an effort to read all of the lore items I found throughout my first Overture playthrough, but I found myself losing patience with reading each and every one of these as I got to the latter half of the expansion, which is where the voice tapes come in. Scattered throughout the DLC are a handful of tapes which can be played through the Echo player you find in the workshop atop the greenhouse. These tapes contain voice recordings from various NPCs, giving the player the ability to listen to snippets of past events as they happened instead of through another NPC's recollections or just text. Admittedly, some of these are a little too long for me, but I'm still glad they exist. If the sequel is to implement these, I hope they make it so you can listen to these while moving around and playing the game instead of being forced to sit there and watch a still screen the entire time. 2 of the new DLC bosses have special NPC summons. These aren't just the nameless specters found in the base game, but rather actual NPCs you meet throughout the DLC and interact with, and that's pretty cool. I won't show them off just yet, but they'll appear once we get to talking about the bosses. I wish all of the major bosses got this treatment throughout the DLC. Unfortunately, I don't think there's quite enough friendly and able-bodied stalker NPCs in the DLC that could qualify for this job. But these special NPC summons have much cooler attacks and extra dialogue, and just feel way more epic than those specters found everywhere else. Let's talk about quest lines next. I've always greatly appreciated Lies of Peace quest design because A, they're pretty easy to follow since NPC markers will appear on the teleport screen whenever their associated quest lines are ready to progress, and B, even if you miss out on the quest, there's typically no gameplay related rewards tied to these. Quest design in the DLC continues in the same way, but there's really interesting ones I want to mention here just because I like them so much. While you're passing through the zoo, you can find an aviary that has a sign that explicitly mentions to be quiet around the birds. Once you obtain the tracker's horn later in Zelator, you can bring it back here and disturb the birds to get a golden seed. The second of these was one of my favorite moments throughout all of Overture. As a part of the tracker's questline, you get sent to the lighthouse to investigate the mystery of the missing lighthouse keeper. It's repeated that this guy was quite the large fellow, and Gemini notices some sort of a weight detection mechanism on the bottom floor of the lighthouse. Back at the coastline, the wandering merchant by the shipwreck sold the Giant's Amulet, which does nothing but make you very heavy. I had bought it because it was really cheap with no expectations of using it. Back at the lighthouse, I spent an embarrassingly long amount of time trying to figure out the mystery before things eventually clicked and the door opened. And that moment was magical for me. I had a lot of fun solving these simple mysteries and how seemingly disconnected little pieces of the world connected together. Another really cool thing about Overture is how the actions you take in Overture can influence the base game. We are time traveling after all. The golden seed we got earlier can be planted in a pot at Eventide Hotel Krot, which grows into a flower that can be plucked in the base game and used to adorn the gramophone. Completing Goddard's questline grants you a faded painting you can hang up in the Eventide Hotel. Go to the present and you can touch the painting to bring color to it. You can buy and give the cat a collar in the past, which he'll still be wearing in the present. And my favorite of these all is Rosara's questline. Starting from the carnival, you will periodically run into the NPC Rosara, who will ask you to bring her various items in exchange for scraps of a picture. Upon completing both her questline and the DLC, you can go meet her in the present timeline at Krot City Hall by the Friendship Tree, where she recognizes you as her best friend and gives you the final picture scrap during her last moments. And I love all of this. The examples here are just the ones I found on my first playthrough, but I know there's more out there, like changes to certain bits of dialogue. I'm happy that they decided to take advantage of having time travel in the story instead of simply using it as an excuse to take us to winter. The new difficulty options added with Overture stirred up a little bit of drama, as discussion of difficulty options always seem to do with this genre. With the patch that came with Overture, 2 new difficulty modes were introduced to the game: Butterfly's Guidance and Awakened Puppet. Awakened Puppet is the easy difficulty and Butterfly's Guidance is the very easy difficulty. The pre-DLC base difficulty became the hardest and was named Legendary Stalker. I don't believe there's any official information out there in regards to exactly what is different between each mode, but I'm simply going to assume that it's purely numerical changes on the enemy side. When I heard that difficulty options would be coming with the DLC, I was expecting an easy and hard mode to be added, or maybe just an easy mode, but I certainly wasn't expecting an easy and a very easy mode. The argument for intended difficulty typically is about how these kinds of games are supposed to be hard, that the developers made these games because they want you to experience a hard game, and that overcoming this challenge is what makes playing these games so satisfying. Implementing an easy mode disregards this principle, resultantly removing the sense of accomplishment that makes these games feel so good to play. I think all of this is true, except for the last part. And the reason for that is very simple. Difficulty means different things for different people. Yes, I absolutely understand the highs and lows of overcoming extraordinarily difficult bosses, how impossible and unapproachable they feel at first, that one attack that you just cannot get a grasp of and it keeps killing you over and over, somehow getting that miracle attempt on your 4th try, but then you psych yourself out and die and never get close to that for the next 20 attempts, and then finally, after what feels like genuinely forever, killing that boss and having a nuclear catharsis explosion go off in your brain. I understand how all of this feels, because this is my favorite part about these kinds of games. I distinctly remember how much trouble I had with Scrapped Watchmen of all bosses on my first ever playthrough, and how my hands were shaking from excitement after having killed him. But just because this is my favorite aspect about these kinds of games, doesn't mean it will be for everyone else. Legendary Stalker difficulty might be just right for some people, but whatever's just right is completely subjective. Some people might want to see everything a game has to offer without bashing their head into a wall for 20, 30, or even more attempts, and a lower difficulty option lets them get through the game at a more reasonable pace. Maybe for some people, playing the game on Butterfly's Guidance is already a hard mode experience for them, and they'll struggle with it even more than some other people did with Legendary Stalker. The discourse that comes with difficulty settings is infuriating to me for this reason. I really don't see any issue with developers wanting to make their games more accessible to players without impacting the current player base. There already were options like summons, throwables, the Aegis Legion arm, and the Perfection Grindstone to make the experience easier for yourself, but these are things that you need to be aware of in order to use. While a struggling player can use these various options to make things easier, they might also just not engage with these systems because they aren't aware that they will make things easier. So having straight up difficulty options to choose from the start is a more surefire way of modulating difficulty. I'm also glad that the difficulty options are something you can adjust in the options at any time, just in case the player finds that the setting they've picked for themselves is a little too easy or a little too difficult. Maybe someone is just unbelievably hard stuck on a boss and they're not having fun anymore and simply wants to get past it. Maybe some players want to breeze through regular enemies and levels but then crank the difficulty back up when it's time to fight a boss, or vice versa. I don't know what everyone's gaming preferences are, and I frankly do not care. If I prefer to play this game on Legendary Stalker, then that's all there is to it. If you played the game on Butterfly's Guidance and had fun doing so, then that's great, and I'm glad to hear that you got to enjoy the game that I love so much. And even then, the game did implement a hard mode. So the developers really did cater to everyone, for those who want to experience the scenery and story at a relaxed pace, to those who just love getting their teeth kicked in by a boss. There's a little something for everybody here. The new Battle Memories and Death March features are what I'm talking about. These are the Boss Rematch and Boss Rush game modes respectively. In the original video, I wished for both of these things, so I was super stoked when I found out that these would be coming to Lies of P. Even better is that these features were implemented in pretty much the single best imaginable way. Lies of P was already an exceptionally replayable game for me with its linear level design and world progression alongside the weapon assembly system, but these new features help take the game's replayability to a whole new level. When doing either of these new modes, you are given 5 difficulty options, with the first 3 difficulties being unlocked by default. You need to clear 3 to unlock 4 and clear 4 to unlock 5. I don't believe there's any official information out there about how exactly each difficulty level is scaled. From what I've seen online, it seems that level 2 is about the same as base New Game on Legendary Stalker difficulty. Level 3 and 4 are somewhere along the lines of New Game Plus, Plus 2, or Plus 3, while level 5 is the absolute maximum New Game cycle scaling. So there you go, there's your hard mode. Enjoy running around and getting one-shot by every boss under the sun. I really like this form of implementation. I like that there's every option available here. You can purely focus on practicing against a boss in a relaxed, low-risk environment on level 1 difficulty, or really push your skill to the absolute maximum on level 5 difficulty. Some of these level 5 bosses will absolutely humiliate you. The level 5 DLC rematches completely destroyed me, and beating all of them was one of the hardest things I've ever done in any video game ever. These level 5 bosses really sat me down and made me learn all of their attacks precisely. On normal runs, I could get away with not knowing the exact timing on many attacks since I could heal my mistakes away through guard regain. But you don't get that same kind of luxury with level 5 bosses, since a fair number of attacks will just start one-shotting you. Even the attacks that won't one-shot you are still extremely threatening, since 2 or 3 mistakes in a short window of time could, and most often would, translate to instant death. While level 5 is not my difficulty of choice for replays, I am really glad that I put in the time to defeat all of the DLC bosses at level 5. I really had to lock in and learn not just the guard timings, but also the various telegraphs for optional extensions. Because the level 5 bosses have so much health, dealing damage wasn't just about figuring out when it was safe to punish, but also how to maximize my damage output during these windows of safety. Another big problem I consistently ran into for many of these fights was finding opportunities to repair my weapon. Weapon durability wasn't a mechanic I had to engage with properly in a long time, since it's a system that becomes less and less important as player skill improves. However, the level 5 bosses take so damn long that your weapon will inevitably start to wear down. On many occasions, I had to give up on opportunities to punish the boss to repair my weapon because I knew I'd suffer the consequences later if I didn't repair it now. Fumbling back and forth between my heals and repair tool got me hit or killed an embarrassing number of times too. In a brutal and masochistic way, doing these level 5 bosses was like playing the game again for the first time. Death March, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite. Similar to level 5 bosses, finishing a 16 boss death march on level 3 difficulty was one of the most difficult things I've ever overcome in a video game, maybe perhaps even the most difficult. And before anyone asks, the number is 16 and not 17 because I refuse to do the Black Rabbit's rematch again. I didn't keep track of how many days it took me to do my first level 3 16 boss death march, but it definitely eclipses the previous thing that took me the longest to do in a video game, which was Sword Saint Ishin for the first time. What will get you killed in Death March is the accumulation of small mistakes that would normally never matter in a regular playthrough. In a normal run, being bad at dealing with Phase 2 Swamp Monster's Charge or Phase 2 Laxasia's Opener is not the end of the world. You've got the spare heals to shrug off the damage, and even if it does kill you, you can get right back into action in no time. But Death March does not afford you these kinds of luxuries. The occasional attack you missed or even the buildup of chip damage from hitting sequential normal guards will add up and start costing you heals, and with upwards of 17 bosses you need to kill in a row without replenishing these heals, it can start to get quite brutal, especially as you start getting into those DLC bosses at the end with low or even no heals. I normally enjoy staying topped off in these fights as an added layer of safety, but I had to spend a lot more time than I would have liked at 50% or lower health because I didn't want to waste any amount of healing. I think I could probably do a level 4 death march someday once I start getting cleaner kills on the DLC bosses, but I could never imagine doing a level 5 death march. I was already getting demoralized and tilted when dying to boss number 14 or 15 and needed to take short breaks between each attempt, and I would probably just tilt harder once I start wiping regularly on base game bosses. I'm typically not one for consumables in these games, but death marches were where I felt comfortable bending this rule a tiny bit. This mostly came up as a reaction to the discovery that special grindstones do not get replenished between bosses. Being able to use these only twice over the course of 16 different bosses felt too restrictive, so I turned to using the consumable abrasives to make up for this. Within death marches, the usage of consumables is still limited, that is to say, consumables don't replenish themselves between bosses. For example, you can only carry up to 3 acid abrasives at any given time, which means that over the course of the entire gauntlet, however long you want it to be, you can only take advantage of this consumable 3 times. This limited nature of consumables made me much more comfortable with using them in Death March. These are now limited resources that I have to be picky about using, just like the special grindstone buffs are. There's a fun aspect to mapping out which bosses need which abrasives and which bosses I need to just stomach and handle with no weapon buffs. For example, I think it's never worth using an abrasive for Simon's Phase 2 because you spend so much time running away and chasing after Simon that the weapon buff won't actually see that much use. Similarly, I discovered that I found Acid to be preferable against one of the new DLC bosses despite it being a carcass, since Acid makes its weapon break quicker to reduce the pressure of the fight. It's also great that these consumables are fully replenished upon completing or failing a death march, so you never need to worry about having to go get more. I love Battle Memories and Death March. Death March is now my go-to method of playing Lies of P. I have a save file at the beginning of New Game Plus 2 in order to open up the entire P organ, and I've been running level 3 16 boss death marches on this save. The fact that the gold coin tree garden is open from the very start on New Game Plus cycles makes this really nice too, since I can very easily respec my character based on whatever weapon I want to try that day. I did have to mod in a ton of weapon upgrade materials to level up everything, but otherwise, 2 playthroughs let me acquire every boss ergo twice, so I could have every boss amulet and weapon in the game without needing to pick between one or the other. I also really appreciate that both of these features are included in the base game and not tied to the DLC. Let's now get into the most indulgent and overcooked part of the video, where I talk about every single one of the new weapons that came with Overture. In the original video, I only talked about the weapons I used throughout different sections of the game alongside a few extras. However, I wanted to do this for the DLC's weapons because compared to the base game, there are a lot more weapons with unique gimmicks or movesets. I'm a big fan of this personally, as I felt that there were already plenty of solid but simple weapons in the base game. The more gimmicky weapons of the DLC feel extremely well constructed, and it made me really develop a strong appreciation for overall weapon design in this game beyond just the weapon combination system that I adore so much. The DLC does come with a few new straightforward weapons too, and these also have some incredibly fun movesets. So many weapons in this game feel like they had a lot of thought put into them. It's honestly kind of a breath of fresh air compared to the genre standard of having 20 different longswords where 15 of them are just reskins with slight scaling and numerical tweaks. I'm not much of a min-maxer when it comes to these kinds of games, so how a weapon feels to swing is the most important thing to me. I'm someone who typically likes to find a weapon very early on throughout a playthrough and stick with it the whole time because I really value getting comfortable with a weapon and also don't want to deal with the hassle of upgrading multiple weapons. Lies of P is the only game that has ever made me buck this trend and at least give every weapon I find some thought and swing it around a little. And also, I can't express enough just how much I appreciate that none of the weapons in this game are tied to random enemy drops or absurdly long and obscure character quests with seemingly arbitrary failure triggers. While I might not be a fan of every single weapon introduced in Overture, I can respect how so many of them tried to do something unique and interesting. As a reminder of the disclaimer from the very top of the video, all of these weapons were tested against various level 5 bosses from the base game on my level 213 New Game Plus 2 save. As I said, I'm not a min-maxer for these kinds of games, so my stat distributions and amulet setups most likely are not set up to deal optimal damage. Let's start with the Death's Talons. Unfortunately, these were a letdown for me. I really wanted to like these too, but I just could not come around to them. The main problem I have is the short base range of the weapon, since I strongly dislike short weapons in this game. The heavy attacks remedy this by having the claws extend out, but I think this just makes the claws' light attacks completely worthless. The heavy attacks are only marginally slower than the light attacks, and I think a range extension is absolutely worth this tiny trade-off. That being said, I did not really find myself enjoying spamming heavies with this weapon. The running heavy is also kind of janky since you drag the claws along the floor before attacking. It can get pretty awkward if you use it while too close to an enemy because your attacks come out slower than it feels like it should. The Handle Fable Art applies a temporary weapon buff, which changes the moveset, with the most notable change being that the heavy attack is now an extremely fast spin. The moveset is a bit better, but I still ultimately ended up bouncing off of the claws, partly because of this moveset. I don't really see why the moveset change has to be temporary, it just feels really bad whenever the buff expires and your moveset changes unexpectedly. I think the weapon buff being a permanent moveset change that you can switch in and out of at any time at the cost of some Fable would go a long way in improving the feel of the talons. Durability is also a huge issue for this weapon from my experience. I don't know if it's because the weapon attacks really quickly or if it has a special durability modifier, but it felt like the talons broke down a lot faster compared to most other weapons in the game, which grew really annoying really fast. I really wish I liked these, but I just cannot get past the pile of nitpicks that I have for it. The Royal Hornbow is the game's first ever truly ranged weapon. Normally I hate ranged combat in these kinds of games because the bosses are almost always designed with melee combat in mind, and ranged combat feels like a last minute thought that was slapped in without consideration for how enemies are designed. Lies of P bypasses this issue by heavily incentivizing the player to stay within melee range so the bow doesn't really run into the same problems ranged combat usually does in these kinds of games. From a mechanics perspective, I found this weapon to be quite difficult to use. The standard light and heavy attacks do pretty terrible damage and stagger, so you need to take advantage of all of this weapon's special traits to maximize your output. However, this isn't like the Crescent Glaive or the Two Dragon Sword where you can consistently output high damage through the weapon gimmick if you're playing well. A very large portion of this weapon's damage output is reliant on its expensive Fable arts, meaning that there's quite a bit of time spent on bosses where you're just tickling them, and most of the damage you do is going to be coming in huge bursts. So it's a relief then that the Fable arts are both very strong and fun. The handle Fable art hits really hard, and it's better for how long it takes to fully charge it. You can charge this safely while a boss is down, but I actually found that you can also charge this at the start of boss fights while the boss is approaching you if the arena allows for it. I was able to do it against bosses like Fuoco, Archbishop, and Laxasia, for example. It's nice to be able to start these fights with a chunk of the boss's health bar removed from the beginning. But the real treat of the Royal Hornbow is the Blade Fable art. This one is a ton of fun. It functions like a normal dodge that shoots an arrow at the end. However, I think this Fable art is only ever worth using fully charged. When fully charged, you fire 3 arrows in a spread. If you dodge backwards with it, only 1 arrow will connect and the other 2 will go flying off unless the boss is nice and wide, like King of Puppets. There's an incentive to dodge forwards and stick as close to the boss as possible with this to make sure you can point blank all 3 arrows for massive damage, and it's absolutely worth going for. It feels awesome to dodge attacks with it, especially grabs, and the damage from it is outstanding. Outside of the 2 excellent Fable arts, the bow's charged attack also has a perfect timing mechanic to it. There will be a visual and audio cue during the charging, and if you let go right when it happens, the attack releases instantly, pierces through enemies, and seems to do extra damage. If you let go too early, you do a normal heavy attack, but if you let go too late, there's a delay before the attack goes off. Therefore, mastering the timing on the charged attack is critical for making the most out of this weapon because, as I've said, the normal and heavy attacks are quite bad. I lost a Death March once because I missed the timing and failed to break the final DLC boss, after which I panicked and he killed me. This sounds annoying, but I thought the timing was fairly easy to get used to. While I wasn't perfect at it, I was still able to land perfect shots more often than not without too much practice with the weapon. So the bow's pretty cool, but it's just unfortunate that the damage and stagger is not great outside of the Fable arts. I'd love to see another take on a ranged weapon or two in the sequel to see what the developers can cook. I think a rifle with a bayonet could be pretty cool. Imagine if the rifle was just a handle and you could attach all sorts of stupid blades on the tip of it. It would look ridiculous, but that's the fun of it. Arch's Guardian is up next. For all the people who wanted Laxasia's big sword, here's your cute little replica version of it. Now this is a truly sad weapon. Arch's Guardian was by far and away the most agonizing weapon in the game to use across all of the death marches for a few reasons. The most important reason was that its damage was very poor. It doesn't really matter how intricate or fun a weapon's gimmick ends up being if it doesn't have the damage to support it. I can stomach low damage output, but even I have my limits with tolerating bad damage. Occasionally the stars will align and the weapon will do decent damage, like against Fuoco, which is the reason why I picked him for this weapon, but the rare occasion was not enough to save the poor average performance. One of the new DLC bosses does care about the number of hits you land on it, and the heavy and charged attacks on the Arch's Guardian perform a lot of little hits with each attack, so while the weapon has its use cases, I found myself losing patience with it pretty quickly. Maybe my stat spread was bad and this was about one time I should have looked into min-maxing, but what's done is done. The Blade Fable Art is the most important part about this weapon. It's a weapon buff that grants extra electric damage, increased attack speed, and, most interesting of all, increased dodge speed. Combine this with the blade's lightweight and it having both a slash and stab affinity, and this is now probably in contention for being the best all-purpose blade in the game. I haven't done enough testing with it to say anything definitively, but the eye test checks out. I don't know exactly what changes with the enhanced dodge. The dodge comes out faster, but I have no clue if the iframes or the distance of the dodge are any different. I guess I'll shout out the Handle Fable Art 2 while we're here, which is a laser. It's pretty funny, but felt quite impractical to use from my experience. You can use it when a boss is recovering from a fatal attack or something, but there really isn't a great window to use it otherwise. The handle on this weapon offers something interesting when it comes to making weapons. Arch's Guardian and the new Welder weapon we'll talk about later are the only two weapons in the game that add elemental damage to the weapon from the handle. As a result, it is now possible to assemble weapons that allow you to inflict two status effects at once. In the case of the Arch's Guardian handle, it inflicts electric damage on its heavy and charged attacks, so you can combine it with something like the Acid Crystal Spear blade to inflict electric shock and decay simultaneously. Personally, this was not a selling point for me, but I'm sure someone else out there was thrilled by this prospect. In its base state, the Arch's Guardian's charged attack is quite bad. The damage is not good enough to justify how slow it is, which is where the Blade Fable Art steps in. Add a little electric damage and attack speed to the charged attack, and boom, problem solved. Except when the buff is active, the weapon just feels tolerable to use, like this was supposed to be the base performance of the weapon. While buffed, you can pretty freely spam the charged attack and it feels okay, but when the buff expires, the weapon just goes back to feeling bad to use. Giving attack speed buffs in these kinds of weapons is always a little weird because attack speed makes a huge difference in the feel of a weapon. Swapping off of a tolerable speed while buffed to the original terrible state just made me hate the base speed of the weapon even more. I ended up spending most of my time on the successful run not even bothering with the buff because I wanted to keep things very simple after several frustrating attempts trying to play by the weapon's rules. I don't think I've ever had to fight a weapon as badly as this one before. This has gotta be my new least favorite weapon in the entire game, period. Moving on to slightly greener pastures, La Vendetta is a weapon that I'm convinced is ripe for the breaking, but exactly how, that I'm not sure of yet. The weapon's moveset is completely unremarkable, but that's okay because the main gimmick of this weapon is tied to the blade. Each time you guard, the weapon builds up to 3 charges, which is expended through charged attacks for extra added explosions and damage. And it's a lot of added damage. It was so much added damage that it created an extremely specific problem for me during death marches. If you stagger a boss with a hit that does too much damage, the boss will instantly recover and give you no window for a fatal attack. I know this sounds like a complete non-issue because if I did enough damage to skip the fatal attack, that's basically the same as having performed the fatal attack. The issue stemmed from my reliance on the Frenzied Amulet during death marches, a new DLC amulet that restores some health upon performing a fatal attack. It doesn't recover the most health ever, but when I'm fighting 16 bosses in a row, it adds up. So missing out on that extra health during death march made me a little anxious. Anyways, the blade seems to really put out numbers. The handle's Fable Art can also be wound up to consume the blade's explosive charges, which is a nice bit of synergy. The blade's Fable Art further enhances the explosions for even more damage that the weapon doesn't need more of. My only real complaint about this weapon is that the smoke from the explosions can sometimes make it hard to see what the bosses are doing, but that's it. Great blade otherwise. The handle could be better though. While the synergy between the handle Fable Art and the blade's charge mechanic is nice, there's probably a better feeling combination out there, I think. The Police Baton comes to mind, with the handle Fable Art further buffing your occasional charged attacks. If you want to see something ridiculous, go put a huge blade like the live puppet axe on the Vendetta handle and try some charged attacks. The Monad's Rose Sword is the weapon you get from killing the final boss of the DLC, and it's really cool and very deserving of that honor. It has 2 stellar Fable Arts with some really cool outplay potential on both of them. The handle Fable Art is the one everyone loves. It looks amazing and does a lot of damage. If you time it well, you get complete invincibility during it, and it feels completely badass to use it to immune a boss's attack. Granted, it is a pretty big if, because the windup is quite long, and you also can't control where you land, so if the boss isn't staggered by the Fable Art itself, there's a decent chance the boss just slaps you the moment you land. Some attacks I was able to dodge with the handle Fable Art were Phase 2 Archbishop's Big Blue Blast and Romeo's Fireside combo. It also has some funny usage in the Black Rabbits rematch, since you can enter the arena and start winding up the handle Fable Art right away. Since the arena is so small, you can reliably hit all 3 of the little rabbits for some nice damage. So the Fable Art's pretty cool, but I vastly prefer the Blade Fable Art. It lets you Nothing Personnel Kid teleport behind enemies, which can be used to dodge through enemies on a number of attacks. You can also use it to outplay stuff like grabs, which always feels sick, especially since you can use the second and third inputs to re-engage right away. It also helps that the damage is really good. If you like style points, then this is the weapon for you. The Silent Evangelist's mace ended up being quite a pleasant surprise. I was really happy when I found out that the handle Fable Art on this weapon was a variant of the Wrench's handle Fable Art. I've always really liked that Fable Art, but was hugely put off by the handle's extreme weight and low speed. Thankfully, the Snake Mace is much lighter and honestly just has a better version of the same Fable Art, which means I don't think I'll ever consider the Wrench handle for anything ever again. The handle Fable Art can be used right after blocking a hit to deliver a special counter, and you can also do an additional input afterwards for another hit. The best part about this additional hit is the insane tracking it has on it. P will happily jump after the boss no matter how far away they are at such a speed that it looks a little ridiculous, but it means that this second, highly damaging hit is basically guaranteed to always hit, which is great against enemies that move around a lot like the little rabbits or those that jump away like Victor. The second hit can stagger too, which is a very nice bonus, especially when combined with the crazy tracking on it. The Blade Fable Art was a real surprise for me though. I had zero expectations of it going into a death march, thinking that the only place to use it would be when bosses were recovering from a fatal attack, and even then I think I would have rather saved the Fable for more handle counters. But it turns out that you can actually hose down bosses a lot more often than I thought was possible. A single tap of the Blade Fable Art comes out fairly quickly, and it's a totally reasonable punish option. When testing, I first found it very difficult to time the Fable Art since it seemed to extend beyond whenever I let go of the button. But it turns out timing it is also very easy since each input consists of 3 ticks, so I could always anticipate how many ticks I would get based on audio cues. One minor downside is that I don't think the blade and handle are really meant for each other. They both have Fable Arts that want you to be using them consistently. The Blade Fable Art would really appreciate status-based amulets like Nightmares and Strategists, which the Handle Fable Art gets no benefits from. One actual downside of the weapon is that the moveset involves a lot of spinning around, especially on the charged attack, so your attacks can sometimes miss if your positioning is slightly off. Being mindful about your positioning and staying in front of the boss at all times remedies this pretty easily, but it still means that the Snake Mace requires more thought and positioning than most other weapons do. The Lorenzini Bolt has one particularly interesting quirk to it. It provides the only possible method of performing a charged running attack. As you run, the fire changes color and the damage output increases for each tier. At maximum charge, it seems to do roughly triple the damage output of a standard heavy attack. However, despite its superior damage output, it's kind of difficult to find a place where this is applicable because you need a workable runway. One of the new DLC bosses gives you a decent window because one of its attacks incentivizes you to run away, and it has a gigantic arena, and you'll get to see that later when I talk about the boss. While I don't know too many use cases for it, I'm still glad the charged running attack adds a lot of damage so that it's at least worth the risk. It's always the worst feeling in the world when you try something risky or convoluted and the payoff just isn't worth it. I think it's also cool to see it be used in some speedrun categories. The Blade Fable Art is a bit tricky to judge. At the cost of 1 Fable slot, you can fire 1 projectile. From rough testing when firing all 5 rounds, it seems to do similar damage to the Handle Fable Art on average unless you seemingly high roll most or all shots. The subsequent shots fire out much quicker than the first one, so it's a Fable Art that wants you to commit to it whenever you decide to use it. The windup on the first shot makes it pretty difficult to use as a poking tool, which is a shame. If the first shot came out quicker, then I think I could see myself using it a lot more often. It's not a bad Fable Art per se, but when paired with the Handle Fable Art, I think it makes it really hard to justify using the blades because it takes so much less Fable for similar damage that comes out quicker and can stagger. You can fire off all 5 rounds whenever a boss does something that requires you to stay back, like King of Puppets throwing a tantrum in Phase 1 or Phase 2 Swamp Monster doing its crab walk. I'm sure there's more opportunities to punish, but I didn't really want to use the Blade Fable Art very frequently because of how much more widely usable the simple thrust on the handle was. I like the weapon, but there's probably better pairings out there for both the blade and the handle. Puppet of the Future's Welder was probably the biggest surprise of the DLC for me. I had very low expectations going into a death march with it because the moveset felt terrible when I briefly tested it at the hotel. This weapon operates on a very different axis compared to every other weapon in the game since it's a flamethrower. You hold down the light attack to shoot a stream of fire. Whereas every other weapon in the game is about getting a feel for the combos and figuring out what lines feel best for you, the welder is a test of timing. It's all about learning how long you can channel between boss attacks and when you can also sneak in a hit or two, and I think that makes it a really cool weapon. Trying to maximize my uptime with the fire was a really fun challenge. Because of how fast one tick of fire is, it's very easy to sneak in small hits. These little hits aren't that great for damage, but being able to maintain overheat buildup and accumulate Feeble are important, especially because of how strong the buff from the handle Feeble art seems. It adds quite a bit of damage, stagger, and I think even status buildup while active. Unsurprisingly, the welder is an outstanding carcass killer, but surprisingly, it also strangely overperforms against Phase 1 Laxasia for whatever reason. I genuinely have no idea why this is the case, but the welder can really disintegrate certain bosses when the stars align. One major downside of the welder is that the charged attack stinks. It has some pretty solid reach to it because of how long the blade is, but it takes so long to fully wind up. Chaining a charged attack off of a light attack is a bit better, but still clunky to pull off from neutral. The blade Feeble art can thankfully stagger, but even this isn't perfect because sometimes it just slid off of bosses like a Romeo during my testing. I would say that some alternative stagger tool like the puppet string, one of the new Legion arms, or even shot puts are mandatory to bring alongside the welder. Another peculiarity of this weapon is that the base form of the welder blade on the welder handle is probably the best pairing in the game for each other, the complete opposite of some weapons we were just talking about. The range of the flames scale with the range of the blade, but the tick rate is independent of the blade's weight, and since the charged attack is so bad, you'd also want a blade with the Feeble art that can stagger. The welder blade accomplishes all of this, with the range being the real selling point. The blade and the handle pair so well together that this may as well have been a special weapon that you can't dismantle. My favorite weapon of Overture, and possibly my new favorite weapon in the entire game, is the Pale Knight. First of all, it's a gunblade, which is sick as hell, but my favorite part about the weapon is that it's got a buttery smooth moveset. Every attack in the moveset flows together seamlessly. The weapon has 4 different charged attacks to make sure you can always smoothly chain into one regardless of which attack you're doing. There's one from neutral, another from chaining off of a charged attack, and 2 more based on which swing of the light attack chain you're in. You can even chain charged attacks off of both the blade Feeble art and the fatal attack. Simply just swinging the weapon around feels amazing. Staggering a boss with the blade Feeble art and immediately dashing back in is just a fantastic feeling. It also just does a lot of damage to the point that I think it might be a little overtuned. Yes, the handle buff does add to this, but even at a baseline, the weapon is really powerful. I guess you don't want to disappoint all the people who wanted to use the cool gunblade, which is fair enough. It's better for weapons to be a little too strong than a little too weak, I think. As powerful as both the Pale Knight and the Rose Sword are, I do think that these two are still a tier below the Crescent Glaive and the 2 Dragon Sword in terms of pure power level. The Glaive is just so efficient with its Fable economy that if you're good enough at the weapon, you can consistently make use of the high damage Fable art. The 2 Dragon Sword unique charged attack can let the best players absolutely humiliate some bosses by negating every single attack. As powerful as the Rose Sword and the Pale Knight are, they just can't quite break bosses in the same way those 2 other weapons are able to. And for the final weapon of Overture, we have the Maniac's Pinwheel. This is the weapon I had the biggest 180 on throughout my testing. I really did not like this weapon at all in the beginning. The Pinwheel's signature gimmick is that the blade spins as you run around or dodge. Each stack of the spin makes you do more damage, but it reduces your attack speed by causing your blade to get stuck in the enemy. It's hard to describe because the actual swing speed of the weapon doesn't change, but it causes your attacks to complete slower. This felt really bad at first because I just could not deal with the constantly fluctuating attack speed of the weapon, and this aspect of the weapon was drowning out everything else. But as I got used to this quirk of the Pinwheel, the more I began to appreciate its various strengths. The blade Fable art is incredible on this thing. It basically gives you a super dodge that lets you power through any attack that isn't a grab. It's another one of the Fable arts that provide an alternative mode of defense like guard parry or the glaive counters. I have no specific frame data, but it feels like it has more active frames than a normal dodge or perfect guard does. In exchange for taking a trivial amount of damage, you can deal damage and stagger to an enemy while also fully stacking your weapon instantly. If your stacks fall off while defending yourself, you can use this to immediately get your momentum back without needing to run around or force yourself to dodge. If there's one specific attack on a boss that gives you trouble, then you can power right through it with the blade Fable art. It's honestly kind of insane and one of those instances in which One Fable Art is so good that it invalidates the existence of the other. One part of the pinwheel I ended up really liking was that the light attack coming out of a dodge has a forward jump to it. The weapon incentivizes you to dodge a lot, so being able to immediately get back into combat range is a nice little bonus for smoothing out the general combat loop with this weapon. The blade also has some neat synergies with other handles like the Bramble Curve Sword or the Booster Glaive, since those charged attacks have a lot of forward momentum to them. A really, really great weapon. Big fan of the pinwheel. While we're here, let's also talk about Legion arms. I was not a huge fan of most of the base game Legion arms, aside from the puppet string from a mechanical standpoint and the Aegis from a philosophical standpoint, which is why I can't believe I'm about to say this, but they actually added a Legion arm that I think is worth using and has legitimate places in builds. Cataclysm is a double barrel shotgun arm and it is outstanding. I think this is the new best Legion arm in the game and nothing else comes close. The damage is pretty solid and I was able to get some decent numbers out of this even on a technique or advanced build. It's great for managing group encounters, which makes it really nice for level navigation too, but the best part about this weapon is that it can stagger enemies. Some weapon setups can really struggle with staggering enemies reliably, whether that's due to having awful range, extremely slow swing speeds, no good Fable Arts to use, or some combination of these factors. Cataclysm can patch up this problem extremely well, as a charged blast from it can stagger enemies. However, I wouldn't be praising this part of the weapon as much if it wasn't for the fact that one of the upgrades allows you to charge a shot and store it for later use. Anytime there's a bit of downtime against the boss, you can load up a shot and get ready to blast it at any time. The fact that the loaded shot comes out nearly instantly means you can stagger bosses even during very tight windows. Other Legion arms can stagger bosses too, but none of them are as fast and as easy to use as a preloaded shot from Cataclysm. The upgrade for the perfect shot mechanic is a lot of fun too, and I got a lot of mileage out of this one on my first DLC playthrough. Icarus is the other new Legion arm introduced with the DLC, which throws out rotating blades. The main issue with the Icarus that brings it down for me is that the blades don't stick to their targets. If the enemy starts moving after you throw these out, then the blades will continue to awkwardly spin in place at where the enemies were before returning to you. As a result, I didn't think the Icarus felt great to use. The damage is still decent and it is quite convenient to use, especially when compared to the other premier ranged Legion arm option of Falcon Eyes, which I personally think is abysmal dogshit. The Icarus is something you can just very quickly and non-committally toss out whenever there's a little bit of downtime in a fight, and I think that's its greatest strength. If throwing the blades out was a bigger commitment, then I would feel much more negatively about the Icarus, but as it stands, I think it's just a little bit worse than the puppet string, and the puppet string is still really good. I do wonder if it would become too good if the blades remained in the targets, since you could get guaranteed damage with very little investment, so maybe there's a reason as to why the blades don't stick. I think both the Cataclysm and Icarus are great steps in the right direction for Legion arms. I disliked most of the Legion arms in the base game because I felt they were too situational, too committal, and didn't offer anything you couldn't get out of swinging a weapon. Both the Cataclysm and Icarus are non-committal additions to your build that offer unique ways to complement your weapon's strength and weaknesses. If Legion arms will return as a feature in the sequel, I would love to see less total arms that are designed with the same idea as Overture's additions. Let's also very briefly bring up the P organ. I didn't think the P organ would be seeing any changes with the DLC, but they did add the ability to enhance the potency of individual P organ nodes. I actually like this a lot, since after a certain point in progression, any extra quartz you obtain ends up feeling a bit redundant, especially as you enter New Game Plus cycles. Not everything on the P organ is universally applicable enough, so you do eventually start picking up nodes that don't feel like they contribute much to your loadout. With this added system, you can at least make sure any quartz you pick up is going into upgrades that matter for your setup. And now, finally, we can talk about the bosses. Overture brings with it 8 brand new bosses, most of which are really good. The worst boss in the DLC by a huge margin is Premetamorphic Green Hunter, Overture's one and only secret boss tucked away in a hidden tunnel in the excavation site. But even if it commits the crime of being the worst boss in the DLC, it's only just kind of mid. It's phase 1 swamp monster but slightly faster and with a slightly altered moveset. I don't really have much to say on this guy mechanically. It's not the best moveset ever, but you could also do far, far worse than this guy. I could see myself turning from mostly lukewarm to mildly positive about the Green Hunter if I got to fight it more times. My attempt in the DLC was the 3rd time I ever fought it after all. My main criticism for this fight is that I don't like that his grab can heal and that it also has 2 different telegraphs for what is functionally the same attack. In 99% of scenarios, I dislike it when bosses can heal and the hunter is not in that 1%. While the hunter has two different grabs that have two different animations, both the demanded response and the outcome is the same. A single dodge to avoid the grab and then the boss grabbing you and healing. Functionally, it is the same attack having two different telegraphs, and I dislike that very much. He really should have just had a single telegraph and then a 50-50 chance for which animation would play after. From a story point of view, he's kind of cool, another creative way that the DLC takes advantage of its time travel premise. It's supposed to be a young version of the swamp monster from the base game that you chase out of its nest here in the excavation site. That being said, Premetamorphic Green Hunter is way too cool of a name to be used on this gross little thing. I very much dislike how smoothed over much of its body is. It's also pretty janky that a stargazer appears in the arena after it runs away with the express purpose of letting you warp out of there. I think it would have been cooler if the hunter burrowing as it escapes left behind the tunnel you can take to drop back into the main level. Oh well. Tyrannical Predator is the first boss of the DLC, and I think he's quite fun. The moveset's on the simple side, but the spectacle of fighting an enormous carcass crocodile more than makes up for it. I love the feel of perfect guarding all of his snout smashes, and the tail swipe is fun too. I do know there's quite a few people out there who don't like this boss, and I can pretty easily see why. The arena isn't necessarily small, but it is small for this boss. Combining the boss's huge size with the fact that a lot of his attacks have forward momentum means it's quite easy to find yourself shoved up against a wall with the croc flopping around in your face. The snout smash attacks aren't so bad to deal with from this position, but the bites can be a real problem. You can sort of mitigate this issue by trying to stay mindful of the camera and either move or dodge sideways when you can to try and circle back to the center of the arena, but having to fix the camera like this mid-fight should not be the player's responsibility. As far as attacks are concerned, I don't like his grab attack very much. He begins to charge at you and then snaps into a grab during the middle of it, and it never feels great to try and time a dodge for it. Other than that, I find many of his attacks to be a lot of fun, but maybe the spectacle is doing some heavy lifting here. I do wish this boss got a phase 2 though. The fatal attack spot on this boss is in the eye, so maybe once you take a fatal attack, some other carcass freak show could grow out of the eye like the Elephant Chimera did earlier and then add a few more attacks. I'm sure everybody would love that. I know I would. Next up are the two NPC bosses of the DLC. Veronique, leader of the Sweepers, and Lumacchio, leader of the Bastards. When fighting them for the first time, I found myself thinking, wow, I can't believe the DLC made NPC bosses that are actually enjoyable, but it was soon after killing Veronique and Lumacchio a second time on New Game Plus that I realized that these two aren't really anything like the White Lady, Mad Donkey, Survivor, and other NPC bosses. They don't unpredictably dodge your hits or have attack chains with unclear endpoints or poor move variety. Rather, these two feel more like fighting the eldest of the Black Rabbit Brotherhood, without the siblings of course. Simply a human-sized enemy with a fun and properly readable moveset with much of the randomness of NPC fights taken out. I also really enjoy the atmosphere for both of these fights. Veronique and Lumacchio repeat voice lines like base game NPC fights do, but for whatever reason, this didn't get on my nerves like the base game fights did. Maybe it's because I enjoy their movesets a lot more than the base game ones, but who knows. Both of these fights get a fair bit of build up to them, like hearing Veronique scream throughout Zelator and listening to Gemini's reactions to them, or your various interactions with the Lumacchio through Overture. This is a much better way to handle these encounters than dropping down a ladder and getting jump scared by the Survivor ever was. I sincerely hope that they put the same amount of effort into human 1v1s like they did with Veronique and Lumacchio in the sequel. Getting to the actual bosses, Veronique is guarding the coolant control room within the Zelator underground facility. Her moveset isn't entirely original. There's bits of phase 1 nameless puppet thrown in here like the shoulder check or the double spin. There's also stuff from the player's moveset here too. One of her combos has a crazy delayed hit in the middle of it where she does a spin while twirling her hammer, and I'm pretty sure this is the same attack as the Azure Dragon Crescent Glaive's heavy attack counter on its Blade Fable art. These are the only attacks I noticed, so there's maybe more of Veronique's attacks that are sourced from other places. Not a criticism, by the way, she has plenty of original attacks, and these copied attacks aren't just copy-pasted one for one, they're usually snuck in as a part of a different combo. I actually love the delay on the spin attack. The timing on it is a ton of fun. In fact, all of her attacks are just a lot of fun to guard. There's just something too perfect guarding her giant hammer that feels great. Her combos come out deceptively fast, but they also have quite a few slow attacks mixed into them to try and throw you off rhythm. Another part of her fight I like is the fire she leaves on the ground. Whenever she slams her hammer down at the end of some combos, Veronique can create some follow-up explosion by firing up the engine in her hammer. The fire left on the ground by this can build overheat really fast, and it can be quite punishing if you don't learn to tell. She can also empower her hammer with a fire buff to add overheat to her attacks and guarantee explosions on her slams. Combining all of this can make Veronique feel kind of overwhelming at first. She can proc overheat on you out of seemingly nowhere, and trying to spam dodge to put out the fire while she's full sprinting at you can be quite challenging. Simply tanking the damage over time isn't great either because of how difficult it is to catch a break against her, but all of this can be completely avoided as long as I play well, learning the tells for when she's about to blow up her hammer and recognizing when her hammer is empowered and playing more defensively goes a long way. I will admit, being overheated is the most fun part of the fight for me because of the sudden spike in tension. As far as other attacks go, I like her flamethrower move. It's pretty easy to avoid, but I see this as a sort of a reaction test. The faster you react to her setting her hammer down and get beside her, the more time you get to punish this attack. This is also another fight where being good with your guards is hugely helpful, since her hammer breaks quite easily even without acid. Altogether, quite a cool fight. It's an immense shame though that you do not get her hammer as a reward for killing her. First with the Eldest's Buster Sword, and now this. They even had an opportunity in the DLC to redeem themselves with the Eldest's Sword, since you can find several Black Rabbit hideouts throughout Overture to collect their various outfits. They could have just had the final one of these contain the Eldest's Sword, but they didn't. How unfortunate. Maybe we'll get these weapons in the sequel, where I'm sure we'll be saying that we'll get them in the sequel's DLC. Lumacchio was one of the biggest highlights of Overture for me, and a heartbreaking fight to experience because I really enjoyed this character. He might just be my new favorite character in Lies of P. He comes off as standoffish when you meet him at the hotel first, but talking to him at the entrance to the excavation site really changed my perspective on him. Listening to him talk about the mutual respect between him and Veronique, as well as how he's a coward who doesn't have the courage it takes for self-sacrifice, made me really believe they were setting up Lumacchio to come back in some heroic way later in the DLC. So it broke my poor little heart to see him blast through the door in the shipwreck to challenge you to a duel. The nail in the coffin for me was hearing the tracker be so disappointed to learn about Lumacchio's treachery and how Lumacchio was supposed to be the shining star of Krat. Excellently done, you dastardly writers. As more time has passed since the DLC's release, following Lumacchio's character arc and the showdown in the shipwreck has risen up to become my favorite part about the DLC that isn't one of the major bosses. So the vibes are a 10 out of 10 for me, with the only reason that it's not an 11 out of 10 being that the arena is kind of plain, but maybe even that's intentional. A grandly ambitious man unceremoniously dying alone as a shell of his former self in the middle of an abandoned shipwreck where no one will ever see him again. If this is the case, then Lumacchio is indeed an 11 out of 10. Before we start talking about the actual mechanics of the fight, I want to address one thing right off the top. At two specific health thresholds, Lumacchio will stop taking damage and heal back a percentage value of his health bar. First when he pops the Alchemist's Elixir, and then second when he transforms into a carcass. The better approach probably would have been to give him a larger health pool instead and not heal at all. It can be frustrating when a boss heals back progress you made, especially when this healing just happens and the boss can't be damaged during or cancelled out of it. Maybe the developers were afraid of the player trying to take advantage of Lumacchio backing off during this time to try and burst him down, but there's less clunky ways to accomplish this. The Carcass transformation already has something to deter the player by spewing acid smoke everywhere around Lumacchio, so if the player wants to tank the acid to damage the boss, I think that would have been a totally fair trade-off. The Alchemist's Elixir bit could have used something similar to that, I think. Maybe something like Lumacchio dropping a ring of grenades around himself before taking a swig. It personally doesn't bother me that much since the healing happens at fixed moments for fixed amounts, so it's something I can always take into account, but I've heard some people really not like this part about the fight, and I can see why. Mechanically speaking though, this fight's pretty great. Aside from an umbrella just being a cool weapon of choice, I really like that Lumacchio's thrust attacks can end with him unfolding the umbrella. If the player attacks too early, then they get punished by their attack bouncing off and the umbrella smacking them. But because Lumacchio needs to take a second to fold back the umbrella, it gives the player an unimpeded opportunity to punish the boss if they time their attack well. I'm so glad to see that they actually made use of the fact that he wields an umbrella instead of it being a skin for a basic rapier moveset. The smoke and grenade attack is pretty cool too. It's nothing special mechanically, but I do like the feel of dodging out of the grenades and then perfect guarding his fury attack out of the smoke even if I'm not very good at it. It's also thematically appropriate for a deceitful, backstabbing fellow like Lumacchio to use underhanded tricks like this rather than an honorable 1v1. I love all of the various claw attacks he has in his carcass face, they feel great to guard. There's a slight delay between him leaping towards you and taking a swipe to make sure you're reacting to the right animations instead of flinching at the first draw, and I love stuff like this. Lumacchio also flops around a lot, which makes the fight feel chaotic as hell, but never in a way that makes his moves unreadable. I really enjoy the sudden shift in atmosphere caused by Lumacchio becoming a carcass, him jumping around everywhere, and his panicked voice lines. I do wish the carcass phase implemented more umbrella attacks. It is a bit weird that he makes very little use of the umbrella despite carrying it around the entire time as a carcass, but otherwise, mechanically excellent. So yeah, I really like Veronique and I love Lumacchio. Having seen other people fight these bosses, I think it's a shame when they treat these as a sort of backstab extravaganza and not really bother with engaging with the boss's moveset or mechanics. The base game didn't really leave a good impression with its NPC fights, so I'm not surprised to see people fight these bosses in this way. I don't want to come off like I'm saying that people are playing the game wrong, but I do think fighting Veronique and especially Lumacchio on their terms can lead to a really fun time, and some people might be depriving themselves of this opportunity by treating these fights the same way they do the other NPC encounters. Part of me wants to say that backstabbing should be removed as a mechanic entirely because I don't think they really add much to these kinds of games, but maybe walking in circles and chain backstabbing enemies is fun for some people. Anyways, like I said earlier, I hope the sequel puts the same amount of effort into human 1v1s like they did here in Overture. Before we move on to the rest of the bosses, I want to quickly revisit boss rematches. I would have loved to see Tyrannical Predator, Veronique, and Lumacchio be added to the Battle Memories and Death March rosters. Mad Clown Puppet from the base game would have also been a great addition, and I guess I wouldn't mind Premetamorphic Green Hunter either, but at that point, we might as well start adding in Puppet of the Future, Door Guardian, Walker of Illusions, and God forbid the White Lady and the rest of the NPC gang. The only bosses that were made available for rematches were all of the ones that have the dropdowns that say eliminated at the end, which is 17 of them. That gives the developers a clean method of splitting up the bosses into major and minor encounters. Between the 16 bosses that didn't make the cut, the range and quality is pretty extreme, I think. Lumacchio ranks above most of the rematchable bosses from the base game for me, but he didn't make the list. Meanwhile, the idea of doing a level 5 rematch against the White Lady brings me to tears, so I'm grateful that she didn't make the cut. Do the developers view these remaining 16 bosses as equally important, or are these also internally distinguished into smaller groups? There's no way for me to know this as a player, but if I'm out here saying that I want to rematch Mad Clown Puppet, Premetamorphic Green Hunter, Tyrannical Predator, Veronique, and my King Lumacchio, then I think every other boss should also be added to the rematch roster too. I don't particularly care for any of the remaining 12 bosses I didn't list off, but I know somebody out there does and would love to rematch them. Even the Owl Doctor, someone is looking out for him too, I'm sure. This leaves us with the 4 rematchable bosses of Overture, one of which is not like the other.
I think our test subject is behind that door. Where else could it be? Nerves of steel, buddy. Alright, now let's show this overseer who it's dealing with.
Two-Faced Overseer definitely falls behind the rest of the remaining bosses in terms of spectacle, so much so that he feels kind of out of place when side by side with the rematchable DLC crew. He looks like and is very much a vanilla encounter, but still an extremely fun one nonetheless. But as far as these vanilla gimmickless guard check fights go, I think Overseer is the hardest one in the game. The only other boss that comes close would be Phase 2 Nameless Puppet, but I find Overseer to be quite a bit harder. Part of this is that I've fought Nameless Puppet now for much longer than I have Overseer, but the main determining factor has to be that Overseer is so much tankier and does so much more damage. On that point, let's start the Overseer talk off with his health and poise and how he probably has too much of both. We clearly want you to fight him alongside the tracker, and the boss's stats seem to be balanced around this intent. However, the final boss of the DLC also has a special in-fight NPC summon, but it never felt like their stats were bloated to compensate for this. Unlike the traditional Spectre summons which happen before you enter the boss arena, the special NPC summons of Overture require you to do something after entering. In the tracker's case, you need to blow the horn he gifted you when you first met him, I don't know if dynamically adjusting the boss's health and poise for when the tracker is summoned would be a good idea. I don't think it would feel good if your same attacks suddenly took away less of the boss's health bar partway through the fight. Having the option to call him before entering the arena to pump up the Overseer's stats in advance might be okay, but would absolutely cut away from the fun of using the horn and seeing the tracker jump through the window moments later. I can't think of an elegant solution that would solve this, and maybe the current state of the Overseer is the most elegant solution available. That being said, now that I've put quite a few kills into him, I don't mind his health and poise that much. I actually kind of like how tanky he is because it makes the entire thing feel like a bit of an endurance fight. He doesn't have a very deep move pool, so master this simpler moveset and prove that you've mastered it over a lengthier than usual encounter. If I didn't enjoy his moveset as much as I did, then maybe I would be complaining about how miserable it is that this fight takes as long as it does. The Overseer's core gimmick, if you want to call it that, is that upon taking a certain amount of stagger, he will enrage and turn furiously red. Upon doing so, the Overseer speeds up, gains some new attacks, upgrades some of his original ones, and, in general, becomes really fucking hard. I do wonder how much more difficult this encounter is on your first DLC playthrough if you primarily like to dodge but don't summon. On paper, it sounds like a double-edged sword where the Overseer won't enrage as quickly, but once he does, he'll remain enraged for longer. I do wonder if this was an intended side effect of designing the boss this way. I do quite like the pacing of the fight and how the boss ebbs and flows between two different states. You can afford to be quite aggressive while he's green, but then have to switch to full-on defense once Overseer turns red. I love the various delayed attacks he has in his green mode moveset. The one where he drags his weapon along the ground and the delayed double spin are both fun attacks and great tests of timing. The green Overseer actually has a lot of little windows you can punish throughout it because of these delayed attacks. Most weapons I've tried have been able to fit in 1 or 2 hits into many of green mode's combos, although I haven't really tried any super slow weapons yet. My choice of using the Crescent Glaive for the fight in this video actually ended up being kind of perfect, since the weapon's whole gimmick is about counterattacks, which the glaive can do plenty of while the Overseer is green. Getting comfortable with squeezing in attacks is very important because you get far less opportunities to do so once he goes red due to how much faster and longer his combo chains are. As you can see from the footage, I barely used the glaive's counterattack while the Overseer was enraged because I didn't feel comfortable enough with the weapon to commit to them outside of the occasional grab and sometimes the one delay in the middle of his wombo combo. There's always this huge wave of relief that hits you when you stagger the Overseer and watch the color drain out of him, and this feeling never went away from me no matter how many times I've fought him. In general, I really love fighting red mode Overseer. Even missing one guard can be absolutely brutal because of how hard each hit is, but each hit being so punishing is why it feels so damn good to improve at this fight. I love the wombo combo he typically opens with. The one combo where he holds his club horizontally is particularly difficult for me because the timing for it always tends to be just a hair slower than I think it is. He also has several attacks that carry over from green mode, but their timing is sped up, like the thrust into pull or the double spin, which is now a triple spin. The thrust into pull especially feels great to guard well. I don't know what it is, but the timing on the pullback feels really intuitive to me despite there not being any obvious tells. Maybe there's some subtle animation cue I'm picking up on, or I've just been hit by it enough times to memorize the timing, but regardless, it's always satisfying to pull off. The grab attack is maybe the most painful attack in the entire game to look at for me. There are grabs that are bloodier, but I can feel the Overseer's grab in my spine every time I see it. The one final note I'll make for combat is that I like using acid for this fight to make the Overseer's weapon break faster, even if fire is the optimal element for damage. He just attacks so relentlessly in red mode that if you can get the acid proc on him, his weapon breaks rather quickly. Maybe it's just the sheer size of his weapon, but breaking the Overseer's weapon has always felt way more satisfying than any other boss or enemy in the game. And that's Two-Faced Overseer. He's definitely plain compared to the bosses coming up, but he was probably one of my favorite bosses in the entire game to learn. Reviewing my own footage for this video has shown me that there's still a lot of little gaps in the boss I could be taking advantage of, and that alone makes me more excited to fight this boss again.
was told that murderous puppet had come to call on me. So who is this handsome guest standing before me? It matters not. You belong to me now. To think I became anxious when told a fearsome foe had arrived.
Multi-target boss fights have a few challenges they need to overcome to make things a fun and fair experience. How do you design the attack patterns and AI on these bosses to make sure the player isn't being unfairly clobbered by 2 or more enemies at once? How do you make sure the player won't get blindsided by a boss attacking them from off camera? How do you make sure the fight doesn't lose tension and become easier after you kill one of the multiple targets? Lies of P has already taken a crack at this 2 different times with the 2 Black Rabbit Brotherhood fights in the base game. They kind of cheat the system the first time by having each of the little rabbits enter and exit at various times and carefully managing the eldest's AI, and the fight ends up being pretty good since you're realistically only fighting one target at a time. In the meanwhile, the Rematch falls victim to all of these problems when all 3 of the little rabbits are alive. Markiona, Puppeteer of Death, solves all of these problems with gang fights in such an elegant manner that I'm frankly kind of stunned. This may not be my favorite fight in the DLC, but it certainly is the most impressive and smartly constructed fight. When it comes to concept and execution, this fight isn't just the best boss in Lies of P, it's gotta be one of the best bosses in the entire genre. Markiona commands her Archpuppet through a string. Anytime the Archpuppet is commanded to attack, the string will turn red. This, by itself, solves 2 of the problems I mentioned earlier. Because Markiona and the Archpuppet are strung together, no matter where the puppet is, you will always know where both targets are at all times and know when they're about to attack. Even when the Archpuppet is doing circles in the air while Markiona is catwalking over, you will always be able to know when the puppet is going to attack you and be ready for it. And because Markiona dictates everything the puppet will do and the puppet has no independently operating AI, the 2 will never attempt to overlap their attacks outside of extremely obvious and telegraphed combo attacks. Markiona almost exclusively attacks with their big blue orbs and always starts her combos slowly, so she'll never catch you by surprise and you always have time to prepare yourself. The one attack that she doesn't use her blue orbs for is her little backflip, but that does unremarkable damage, so it serves as a quick reflex check like the eldest of the Black Rabbits starting one of his combos with the stomp. I really like these kinds of attacks because they're not very punishing to fail but can serve as an extra perfect guard opportunity if your reflexes are on point, and I wish more bosses had a small attack or 2 like these implemented into their moveset. The few combo attacks between Markiona and her puppet almost all begin with Markiona in some way, shape, or form, whether it's her attacking or dramatically ascending to the heavens. The Archpuppet will always get close to Markiona during this, so you no longer have to worry about locating it before Markiona strikes. Every single attack on this boss is designed around making sure the player will never be blindsided by anything as long as their camera is on Markiona. The third question about how these fights maintain tension the entire time is also solved in a very smart way. Anytime you empty out the Archpuppet's health bar, it will briefly stun Markiona as she begins to heal it. As the puppet recovers, the fight becomes a 1 versus 1 against Markiona, but if you empty out her health bar, the fight simply ends. I cannot begin to express just how much I love this approach to a gank fight. You can flexibly approach the fight based on whatever makes you feel most comfortable. You could do an Archpuppet-centric approach where you focus on the Archpuppet at all times to make sure you can reliably fight Markiona uninterrupted. You could also focus on directly attacking Markiona and try to avoid the Archpuppet whenever possible to speed up the fight. Then there's various approaches in the middle where you just attack whoever's most convenient at the moment, or an even more methodical strategy like leaving the Archpuppet at low health, then focusing on Markiona, only knocking the puppet down whenever Markiona is doing a big attack or preparing her phase transition. This is the strategy I prefer, even though I'm far from perfect at it. The minigame of trying to pseudo one-cycle her on level 3 has been pretty challenging but a lot of fun. It requires some prep work like packing acid to the fight and making sure to damage her a bit before knocking down the Archpuppet. The hardest part about Markiona ends up not being the actual mechanics of the fight. Rather, it's about how quickly you can swap from target to target and knowing who you want to prioritize when. It tests a vastly different skill set than any other boss in the game does. Your target priority might change based on whichever element you're packing to the fight or whoever's moveset you feel more comfortable handling. Every single strategy I mentioned earlier is totally viable, each approach has its own benefits and drawbacks, and I myself tried all of these playstyles on my first DLC playthrough to try and find the one that was best for me. That's enough about Markiona conceptually, so let's actually start talking about some attacks now. All of her attacks are pretty good, but there are 3 that I have some tiny gripes with. The first is her grab, simply because the animation that plays out after getting grabbed just takes too long. This could be resolved by having the first ever time you get grabbed be the full animation, and then every subsequent grab plays an abbreviated version. The second tiny gripe I have is that the Arch Puppet will start some of its combos with an upwards kick that just does no damage or has no hitbox. I suppose it's better for something to look like an attack and not be one instead of vice versa, but this kick has always rubbed me the wrong way for some reason. I do think it would be nice if it got turned into one of those low punishment reflex check attacks like Markiona's backflip or the Eldest Stomp. The third is... I don't even know what you would call this attack. It's the one where Markiona and the Arch Puppet do all that synchronized spinning. This is one of the very rare cases, if not the only case in the entirety of Lies of P where I have no idea what I'm supposed to do about this attack. The camera spins around a lot if you're locked on, which makes it difficult to keep track of both targets, and I just cannot intuit the guard timings for this one. In practice, it doesn't really matter because spam guarding seems to be good enough for this attack, so it's never been a troublesome attack despite me not knowing how to handle it. Whenever Markiona goes solo, she gains some additional attacks. It's not that these attacks are exclusive to her in solo mode, but that there's a significantly higher likelihood for these attacks to show up while she's solo. She has these 2 different spinning moves, a horizontal and vertical one. The vertical one looks a lot more intimidating than it actually is because spam guarding this one also seems to work. You can run from this, but if you're willing to stand your ground, this ends up accumulating a lot of stagger. My favorite part of this vertical spinning attack is the 2 little pauses she does during it. Because you immediately go on the clock once the Arch Puppet is downed, every second counts during this window. Having the opportunity to try and stagger Markiona during the middle of her attack during this little pause can be hugely rewarding as a result, so I love this little inclusion to her vertical spinning attack. Her horizontal spinning attack is an attack that I am just not good enough to deal with. It looks like it can be spam guarded, but that has never worked for me. If you can manage to dodge into the attack as she starts spinning, then you get a bit of free time to punish her as she continues to spin away. Unfortunately, I always wuss out because I can never get the timing on the dodge right, and I'm always paranoid about her closing the circle on me. There's also the fact that in Phase 2, the Arch Puppet can sometimes do a slam while Markiona is spinning, which further makes me not want to engage with the horizontal spin head on. I typically just choose to run away anytime I see the windup, which is the safest way to deal with the attack, but by far and away the least exciting. When Markiona does her phase transition, she rises up to the heavens while her Arch Puppet does all the work. It'll do 2 dive bombing attacks before a third one that is a follow-up explosion with a large radius. Anytime you perfect guard these dive bombs, the Arch Puppet will be stalled out for a second before it resumes. I think this is a great additional reward for hitting perfect guards. It gives an extra opportunity or 2 to hit the Arch Puppet on the first 2 dive bombs, while buying you extra time to run away from the explosion radius on the third. I love this little direct reward mechanism built into the fight and hope that there's more stuff like this in the sequel. The swamp monster reeling back from having its charge perfect guarded in both phases would be another great example of this. One small thing I've grown to really appreciate about the Markiona fight is how large the arena is. It helps to get a wide field of view in this fight when the Arch Puppet flies around or Markiona starts doing some of her spinning attacks. It also minimizes the chances of the player being awkwardly stuck between a wall and 2 approaching targets, which is vital with how important camera management is in this fight. As I've continued to grind out more and more death marches, Markiona has remained the hardest of the new DLC fights, and by quite a margin too. Most fights in this game are just about getting the timings down, and once you do, that's like 90% of the fight solved, but all the camera and target management going on in this fight meant Markiona remained challenging even if I improved at timings. I also find attempts with lower damage weapons feel much more difficult in this fight since my preferred strategy involves splitting damage between targets. Maybe a Markiona-centric approach would be better for these, now that I think about it. Regardless, this fight is a huge success in several ways. It's a mechanically great fight. The constant camera management makes this fight feel like nothing else in Lies of P without feeling tedious or overly gimmicky, and the way the entire fight is structured has to be a game design masterpiece. Once you get past the sheer size of him, the first thing you will immediately notice about the Anguished Guardian of the Ruins is that the horns on his hand and face will flash blue when you hit them. They're pseudo weak points. Hitting the horns doesn't actually do more damage. However, once you break them, the Guardian will start taking more damage in those spots. Breaking his hand horn staggers him momentarily, while breaking his face horn is a full stagger that downs him for a while and opens him up for a fatal attack. The entire fight revolves around these horns, and breaking them is imperative. There is one big catch though. The horns do not break based on how much damage you do. Instead, they break based on how many hits you do. This is why stuff like the Arch's Guardian, Icarus, and Sawblades are very good at breaking the horns. These are great at dishing out a lot of small hits rapidly. Naturally, this leads to a lot of variance between different setups on how long it takes to break the horns, and I do not like this. Certain setups will always be stronger or weaker against certain bosses based on stuff like elemental damage or the quirks on specific movesets and fable arts, and that I'm okay with. But I think the difference on the Guardian's horns is a little too much. It's not just the fatal attack that's being missed out on, it's also all the free time that comes with the staggers that accompany the horn breaks, which is a lot in the case of the face horn. He stays down for longer upon perfect guarding his red attacks while the horns are broken too, and most importantly, Anguished Guardian is absurdly tanky. He's the boss with the most health in the entire game by a noticeable amount. Even both phases of Overture's final boss health bars combined still come up quite a bit short compared to the Guardian's single health bar. So every opportunity for damage, and especially the damage vulnerability that comes with the horn break, is valuable against this boss, which slower weapons already have a harder time with. The horns really should have broken based on damage dealt, which would really level the playing field for slower and faster weapons against this boss. Setting that dilemma aside, everything else about this fight is pretty great. Anguished Guardian is a spectacle encounter. The mechanics are not the selling point of this fight. When bosses are this big relative to the player, they live and die by the spectacle they present because there's always a risk of overly complicated attacks and combos being too difficult to follow since it's tricky to fit the entire boss on screen at all times, so keep most of the attacks fairly simple but make them look awesome so it feels amazing to react to. Elden Ring's Rykard is an excellent example of this. How the boss's attacks dictate the camera ends up being key for these types of fights, and the camera for Guardian is pretty good 99% of the time. The 1% of the time the camera's not great is the rare occasion where you can get backed up against a wall and the Guardian is just staring you down. Getting backed up to a wall against any boss sucks, but you can normally rectify this issue quickly by just dodging or strafing to the side. But Guardian is way bigger than any other boss in the game, so it takes longer to fix this problem when it occurs. Again, it happens very rarely, but it's always been much more annoying with Guardian than with any other boss for me. Going back to the 99% of the time where the camera is pretty good, Guardian comes with a few tricks to make sure its camera is on its best behavior. Since the fight is designed around having the boss face you at all times, Guardian will move in certain ways to ensure this. One attack involves him crawling over your head to get behind you, but Guardian always does a 180 swiping attack at the end to make sure he's facing you by the time you turn around. The most insane one of these tricks happens whenever the Guardian finds himself facing away from you. He will quite literally bend over backwards to rectify this issue, and it blows my mind every time I see it. Some attacks also have automatic camera adjustments to make sure you can see what's going on. Both of his red attacks will tilt the camera upwards so you can see the incoming attack. My favorite attack of the Guardian's has to be the big anchor drop in phase 2. The Guardian will raise his anchor and slam it down, and after a delay creates a huge explosion. The game forcibly steers the camera upwards for this attack to a point that P momentarily disappears from view to make sure you can never miss the anchor drop. I really appreciate that they take the camera away from you momentarily here to remove any and all ambiguity about what is going on while catching all of the spectacle. This boss already comes with a wider field of view to make sure you can catch all the action, but going the extra step with the camera on the anchor drop is something I can't praise enough. Perfect guard of the anchor also feels great. The most difficult level 5 boss for me was Guardian. It's already an endurance fight normally, but all of that extra health and damage makes it unforgiving. One failed guard is more often than not just a straight up one-shot, even at New Game Plus 2 stats. Consequently, the biggest pain point for me was figuring out ways to deal with several of the Guardian's attacks that look similar to one another at first glance. Learning the slight differences in the tells between these attacks became key for me in overcoming both the New Game DLC and level 5 Guardian, and it's the main reason why I've grown to really love this fight. His two red attacks were very troublesome for me on my first DLC playthrough. It was honestly a bit of a negative for me at the time because I couldn't tell the difference quickly enough. One involves him getting fully up on his hind legs and crashing his whole body down, while the other is just a hand, with the hand attack requiring a quicker reaction than the body slam. Back then I thought these attacks were the same thing. I was initially convinced that the hand attack both looked different and needed a quicker reaction because I was closer to the boss when he got on his hind legs and simply couldn't see his lower half from my camera panning upwards. Clearly, that was just a skill issue on my end back then, and now I have zero problems with the two red attacks. As a side note, anytime the Guardian does a red attack with a broken horn, a perfect guard will cause him to bounce all the way back up and come crashing down. He also takes longer to recover from the second drop, giving you extra time to attack. The feel of Guardian bouncing off of your weapon is incredible and looks amazing, and I love that the camera pulls back for a moment when this happens. I found that dodging into the second drop worked well because perfect guarding knocks you back, so dodging inwards meant I could start punishing right away instead of spending precious time closing the gap. Tiny little optimizations like this are always fun for me. Guardian has a trident combo where he will slash left, right, and left, except sometimes he can optionally extend by smashing his anchor down and dragging it sideways. This attack infuriated me for a long time because it felt like there was no noticeable telegraph for this optional extension, it came out too quickly, and I didn't have a good response for it. But once again, skill issue. Turns out these are two completely different attacks. The trident combo with the extension comes out slower than the one without, so by paying attention to the timing of the combo, I could always know about the extension in advance and prepare myself for that. Knowing this, I've actually grown to really like this attack now, simply because I think it's quite cool to use a slight timing difference to distinguish two otherwise very similar attacks. It requires adapting to the actual feel of an attack instead of any audio or visual cues, and it's a great feeling. And now, let's hand out the trophy for the DLC attack that gave me the most anguish and ruin. The Guardian's laser attacks. His lasers were a run-ender in Death March for a very long time. I just could not get a handle on the timing to dodge through them, and all sorts of different things I tried just weren't cutting it. He has one big laser combo where he'll fire one straight, then go side to side before finishing with a final straight laser. However, Guardian can also just fire a single straight laser or do a side to side if he feels like it. I had a very difficult time deciphering which laser attack would be which until he started firing, mostly because I would instantly begin to panic the moment he glowed white and readied up. The single straight laser and the full combo are not really problems for me anymore. The straight shot comes out quick, but a single sideways dodge does the trick. The full combo always has a big telegraph, and the Guardian will only do it when he's far enough away from you, so there's plenty of time to see him charging up. I do appreciate that the full combo only ever happens from a distance, not only so you can see it starting up, but also that it naturally makes the player have to engage with the attack and not just completely negate it by ducking under his armpits the moment the Guardian starts glowing. It's also fairly easy to mentally prepare for it, since you can always assume the Guardian is ready to fire when he crawls over you to make distance. I'm still really bad at the side-to-side laser, so my go-to strategy for it is just praying that the Guardian never does it. Let's rapid fire through just a few more attacks before moving on. There's one regularly appearing combo where Guardian will trident swipe twice, delay, and then slam. I've spoken about this a few times on other bosses before, but mid-combo delays are always something I really like as tests of player confidence, and this one is no different. The delay on this combo specifically, however, is a lot longer, partly due to the boss just being slower, but also because I think the developers really wanted you to punish this delay, and as I said earlier, every drop of damage really matters against this guy because of his huge health pool. Another attack has him smash down his anchor before dragging it to the left. There's a second devious hitbox on the inside from his trident arm swinging through as well. In phase 2, there's an added aftershock explosion as well as an optional extension to drag the anchor back the other way. I know we've already talked about an anchor dragging attack before, but this one is different, I promise. Surviving this independent anchor drag felt a lot more difficult to me. I found it hard to see the anchor coming if I was too close to the boss. The trident hand hitbox also moves a lot more quickly than anticipated. I can never get the timing down for perfect guarding the anchor drag itself. If things go well for me, I can guard the anchor drop and then dodge out of the drag, but this is an attack that still remains tricky for me. A phase 2 attack I love seeing is one where Guardian will slam his hand before smashing his anchor 3 times and then follow it up with either a red attack or some more trident swipes. I really like this attack because the feel of dodging the 3 anchor smashes is great. In general, any attack that involves the anchor is just a ton of fun for me. Also, as I'm writing this part of the script, I'm realizing that I'm actually dodging a fair number of the attacks instead of just guarding, which is pretty cool. One small complaint I have is with a Guardian crawling over you. The crawl has a weird lagging hitbox that can clip you if you stay under, and I don't like it. I don't mind that the attack exists, but I hate that I cannot tell what is hitting me when this happens. I'm not sure if it's the anchor dragging behind or an active hitbox on one of his feet. It's a very easily avoided problem if you just run opposite of him anytime he gets ready to crawl, but I wish I could see what was going on. He does spin around to slap you at the end of a crawl, but I'm pretty sure that's not the attack that clips you. But yeah, Guardian is another insanely cool boss. The base game's boss roster was pretty great, but it certainly was lacking in one of those true spectacle-centric encounters. Anguished Guardian fills out an important slot in Lies of P's boss roster, and it does an outstanding job at doing so.
Where's the legend I faced before? Shut up, you filthy puppets! Oh, no. I must ask. Did you actually believe you could save your beloved apprentice? And who might you be?
Back in the original video, I talked about how I didn't think it would be possible to create a boss harder than Laxasia without some elements of frustration similar to her teleports. But man, I have never been more happy in my life to be proven wrong. Arlecchino the Blood Artist feels like a fight that truly shows how much the developers understand the limitations of their own combat system. The fight pushes Lies of P's combat system to its absolute breaking point without actually breaking it. Something that's really important about all the enjoyment I got out of this fight was that despite how overwhelming Arlecchino is at first, never did I ever feel like the fight was out of my control. That is to say, it never felt like my ability to beat the boss was dependent on the whims of the boss AI. Fuoco is a great example of this, where Phase 2 could be completely identical to Phase 1 or become a fiery nightmare where Fuoco is non-stop hopping around shooting oil and fireballs. His Phase 2 always has the chance of it taking forever and being much more tedious and dangerous to overcome in a way that's completely detached from how well I'm playing. Meanwhile, with Arlecchino, it never felt like I was helpless against any attack despite how aggressively this boss behaves. A lot of that has to do with the simple existence of a deflection mechanic, since I had an always available and always reliable response to 99% of attacks the game throws at me. As a result, no matter how fast and long Arlecchino's combos got, I always knew what to do. It was just a matter of getting better and more consistent at it. And that makes overcoming extraordinarily difficult encounters in this game feel so satisfying. I'm sure Arlecchino does have definable combos. There are certain attack chains that consistently string together the same few attacks, but across both phases, he attacks so fast and so relentlessly and will optionally extend like it's nobody's business that I couldn't tell you what any combo chains could possibly be, because by the time I'm done describing one, he'll have optionally extended into 3 more swings. Rather, it feels like he's chaining together various smaller combos, with a few of these being dedicated finishers to give the player a window, with Phase 2 being a truly extreme version of this. I adore this about Arlecchino. He feels so different not just from every other boss in this game, but from most other bosses in this genre. 99% of boss fights in this genre can be boiled down to do X when boss does Y. Once you have a response to an attack, that's pretty much all you need for that attack. The process of figuring out the right response and being able to perform these responses for long enough while finding windows for damage is a lot of fun, but Arlecchino is the only boss in this genre, at least of the ones I've fought in this genre anyways, that doesn't fit this mold for me. He feels like the only boss where I have to dynamically respond to each and every incoming swing and decide on the spot what I have to do. There's no use in trying to memorize combo lines and find safe windows for damage, just work with whatever Arlecchino throws at you and adapt accordingly. And so, improving at this fight feels fucking amazing. Lies of P's deflect-centric combat goes a long way in making a fight like this feel so good. No matter how long the boss wants to combo off, as long as you hit your perfect guards, you're making progress in the fight. I have to imagine this fight feels agonizing when only doing dodging because I'm exhausting all of my stamina on something that doesn't directly impact the boss. Phase 1 taught me a very important lesson not just for this fight, but for the game as a whole. Many of Arlecchino's attacks in Phase 1 will have him raise one of his blades and prepare a swing, only for him to stall out the attack and shake his arm around like he's trying to psych you out. And it works. He psyched me out really hard the first time I ever fought him. The valuable lesson that this tendency of Arlecchino's taught me was to always, no matter the circumstance, keep my cool. Never lose my shit because the boss is trying to mess with you, and always wait for the attack. Wait for Arlecchino to stop shaking his blade and actually commit to a swing before I commit to an input of my own. In Phase 2, his eyes will glow bright red as he marches forward to grab you, so always dodge once his arm starts moving. I know it sounds stupidly obvious on paper, but it was a lot more difficult in practice because of how punishing Arlecchino can be, especially because the grab's telegraph is so intimidating. Timing the dodge on the grab was a huge pain point for me because every time I saw it, I would start to lose my mind, spam panic dodge, and inevitably get grabbed and sliced to bits. Easier said than done, and all that. Arlecchino is also a fight where repeated small mistakes can be really punishing, because he attacks so fast and frequently. Hitting normal guards instead of perfect guards will quickly drain you of your stamina and health, giving you less options for punishing the boss, as well as putting you at risk of having your guard broken. Guard regain can remedy this, but if you heal in front of his face, Arlecchino will punish you. His eyes will glow red before he leaps at you and initiates a combo. I love this about Phase 1. Once you discover this interaction, it adds a whole new layer of tension to the fight. It really forces you to be mindful of when you heal, and sometimes you just gotta suck it up and stay at low health because healing could be what gets you killed. At every other part of the game, healing is something that you can kind of do effortlessly. Not completely mindless, of course, but the actual process of pressing the input for a heal is rarely ever a stressful task. But here, Arlecchino will not have any of that. I think this type of interaction works great with Arlecchino, specifically because he staggers rather easily. So if you try your best to stay cool, calm, and collected, no matter how low you get and how long Arlecchino keeps going, he will stagger before long and you will earn that opportunity to heal. It really puts a lot of emphasis onto something that I took for granted at every other point throughout the game. The break debuff he can inflict with certain attacks in Phase 2 functions in a similar way, although to a lesser extent. The break debuff will reduce the amount of healing from pulse cells, but Arlecchino will no longer punish you for pressing the button. The game still wants you to be very particular about when you heal, but this time it's about waiting out a timer than waiting for the boss to flinch. While I still think it's a good piece of additional engagement with the boss, I don't like Phase 2's implementation of this idea quite as much as I do Phase 1's. It's really difficult for me to try and speak of any mechanical aspect of the ridiculousness that is Phase 2 because Arlecchino just has so many different attacks. He has those wrist blades and his blood blades, and The buzzsaws, he will fluidly switch between all of these different weapon types and all of them serve different functions. His wrist blades do lower damage but higher speed attacks. The blood blades are slower but hit harder and often create giant blood smoke explosions. His buzzsaws are mostly combo finishers and his main method of applying break to you. His claws are the only thing lacking a true identity, but they do serve the purpose of looking sick as hell. Anytime he breaks out into an attack chain, you can never know what to expect, and that has made Phase 2 Arlecchino a fight that remains refreshing after all the attempts I've put into him. Arlecchino's opener sure has a lot going on, but similar to Laxasia's Phase 2 opener, once you get over the initial shock of it and start hitting those perfect guards, it's an opportunity for you to take advantage of the opener. This opener killed me so many times on my first Overture playthrough. Because it went on for so long, surviving it for the first time felt like a genuine accomplishment, disregarding the fact that the opener is just a single attack that Arlecchino can do. Once again, I think these types of inclusions are great in deflect-based combat systems because it gives you the opportunity to turn it around against the boss. Writing about this now, it reminds me of Consort Radahn's Phase 2 from Shadow of the Erdtree, always opening with the Holy Orbital Cannon, where all you could do was run for your life and how annoying it got after just a few tries. I do wish you could deflect the blood balls back at Arlecchino at the start for damage, just like the lightning bolts in Laxasia's opener. In general, I just wish you could do that with every projectile in the game, like Fuoco's Phase 2 fireballs. Almost every kill I've seen of Arlecchino from someone else has them run sideways to avoid the projectiles, but I have never been able to pull that off. I don't know what it is, but I can never seem to outrun the projectiles. The only reason I awkwardly dodge into them is because this was the only way I could consistently find myself getting past them on my first level 5 Arlecchino kill. I had perfect guarded them prior to that attempt, but with level 5's damage scaling, messing up a guard or two on the blood balls meant instant death. Backstepping, dodging to the side, and especially running just didn't work for me, so forward dodging ended up being the thing I settled on after much trial and error. My only true complaint I have for the Arlecchino fight is that in Phase 2, his wristblade attacks are pretty hard to see. They're quite thin, and gold isn't the easiest color to see amidst all the snow, especially when Arlecchino moves around so much. I think this visibility issue is exacerbated by the fact that his buzzsaws, claws, and empowered blood blade attacks are extremely visible because of the weapon's size and or color. The same can be said for his dual blades in Phase 1 as well. I was able to somewhat get around the issue of his wrist blades by simply reacting to him swinging his arms around, but I don't think that's the ideal solution to this problem. Maybe if the wrist blades were just red, it would be better. The wrist blades just need something to improve the baseline visibility. Rarely, if you find yourself positioned behind Arlecchino, he will bend over backwards to attack you with his buzzsaws. I completely forgot about this attack because there's really no reason to ever be behind this guy in the first place. I remember discovering this attack for the first time while watching a streamer after I had completed the DLC. It honestly scared the shit out of me when I saw it again while recording this video, which is simultaneously the best and worst place to be scared by a new attack. Anyways, I think it's cool that this exists just to very rarely jump scare people. And now, let's talk about my favorite part about Phase 2 and what I think is the most important attack of Arlecchino's. The blood smoke. Arlecchino will throw up exploding blood smoke after pretty much every empowered blood blade attack. The blood smoke can only be dodged, it cannot be guarded. I love the presence of the blood smoke in this fight. Having attacks that can only be dodged adds an extra layer to think about in the fight, kind of like the various responses that Sekiro's perilous attacks demand. I also like that Arlecchino will use the blood smoke to his advantage by jumping through or over the smoke to test the player's reflexes. I fed countless deaths to Arlecchino from thinking I was safe after dodging the blood smoke right as he leaped out of the explosion. Once you get accustomed to dodging the blood smoke, the feel of perfect guarding Arlecchino's blood blades, dodging the explosion, and then perfect guarding Arlecchino's follow-up combo is perfection. I'd actually love to see more attacks like this in the sequel, attacks that can only be dodged as another method of increasing the complexity of enemy design, besides just more demanding guard chains. Arlecchino feels like the most demanding a boss can get in terms of just guard timings. I know I said something similar in the original video about how I don't think it'd be possible to make a boss harder than Phase 2 Laxasia that isn't frustrating in some way, but Arlecchino did prove me wrong on this front, so I have faith in the developers to be able to create more complex and fun encounters in the future. But the addition of another defensive axis in combat just makes this job a little bit easier while making the encounter more engaging. And this wouldn't be just for the pinnacle difficulty encounters, but for any encounter. The Red Fury attacks already exist in the game as attacks that you can only perfect guard, so I don't see why attacks you can only dodge can't be implemented in the same way at the same frequency. Just give these attacks a consistent audio and visual cue and you're good to go. Similarly, Arlecchino's grab attack. His eyes will flash red as he begins to queue up the grab attack, and I also really like this. Sure, it is very obvious the way he's reaching out and ready to go, but I still really appreciate the cue on a particularly deadly attack. Grab attacks in this game are a little problematic in the sense that they aren't standardized. You can perfect guard some grabs like Phase 1 Laxasia or Phase 2 Nameless Puppet, but other grabs like those on Arlecchino and Markiona can only be dodged. I think making it so that grabs can only be dodged is probably the way to go, since most grabs are already like that. That being said, I've never really liked grabs in these games simply because the answer to an incoming grab is typically not different from any normal attack, while the punishment for failing tends to be much higher. There's also the Red Fury attacks, which have similarly always been kind of iffy to me. I don't think Fury attacks are necessarily a bad contribution to Lies of P, but I also don't think they add anything to the combat loop. They're just extra punishing attacks that demand a more stringent input from the player with no extra reward outside of avoiding damage. Elden Ring Night Rain actually implemented a mechanic that I thought was a great solution to this type of problem, attacks that are too punishing if you fail and not rewarding enough if you survive. Night Rain's solution was giving all grab attacks an audio cue and a purple visual cue. Successfully dodging these telegraphed attacks within a small window will refill some of your ultimate as a reward. I think a similar system like this would be great. Dodging a grab could restore some Fable or grant a temporary damage buff, perfect guarding a Fury attack could do bonus stagger damage or cause the enemy to stumble for a bit like with Swamp Monster's Charge or Anguished Guardian bouncing back up after a horn break. It's just something to make these extra punishing attacks worth the effort of engaging with. Fighting Arlecchino a lot has also made me realize just how potent the P-Organ upgrade for Perfect Guard Causes Stiffness can be. For anyone that is unclear on what this upgrade does, it unlocks a secondary stagger bar that only builds upon Perfect Guards. Once this bar is full, the boss flinches and is unable to do anything for a second or two. This proved to be an absolutely invaluable upgrade for properly learning how to fight Arlecchino, especially in Phase 1. Given how careful you need to be with your heals in Phase 1, getting the occasional extra 1 or 2 seconds to safely heal was a game changer in learning that fight. I also don't really think it would be that overpowered in a lot of instances. You need to get consistent at perfect guards to regularly benefit from this, which is already a difficult task. This simply opens up an opportunity to heal that you have to create yourself. Slower bosses wouldn't be affected by this as much because they already have bigger windows, so the extra time afforded to you by stiffness isn't as important. I'm sure the developers want to one-up themselves after creating Arlecchino, but if they want to match or surpass his level of aggression and speed, then I think stiffness needs to become a core mechanic. I played Dark Souls 1 all the way through for the first time between the release of the original Lies of P video and this one, and it's crazy to me how far the combat in this genre has come since then. Enemies have gotten faster with more diverse move pools and complex attack chains, the player character simply moves and dodges a lot more freely, healing felt so much weaker in Dark Souls 1 both in terms of raw health restored but also with you can't move while healing. Both dodging and healing during a boss fight felt like so much more of a commitment than it is in modern Souls-likes. It's wild to think that some of the crazy shit we can find in stuff like Overture, Sekiro, and Shadow of the Erdtree can trace their roots all the way back to games of this combat pacing. And the genre is going to continue evolving, especially since Souls-likes are coming out so regularly nowadays. I know I went through a whole goddamn ordeal, spanning both Sekiro and Shadow of the Erdtree near the end of the original video, to talk about how improvements in players' defensive decision-making is a win-win for both the developer and the player. Overcoming Arlecchino in Overture has only made me feel even stronger about that feeling, and I hope that the developers find ways to incrementally improve upon the game's baseline stellar combat system. So yeah, Arlecchino is pretty great. Kind of a shame that we don't get his Phase 1 coat though. One really encouraging thing to see in the DLC is that while all of its major bosses are great, they're great in completely different ways from one another. Guardian is a great spectacle, Markiona is such a unique double fight that tests a completely different skill set in camera management, and Arlecchino is an absolutely brutal hands check. I am so excited to see what new directions the sequel will take with its boss design given how many different kinds of successful bosses Overture came with. Arlecchino easily takes the throne as my new favorite boss in Lies of P, which would push Swamp Monster down to number 2, but I don't think I can point out an easy second favorite boss anymore like I did in the original video. Champion Victor and Swamp Monster are still way up there, and Nameless Puppet keeps growing on me the more I fight him as well. but that position for number 2 is now also contested by Markiona, Anguished Guardian, and Lumacchio. Veronique and Two-Faced Overseer are just slightly behind this cluster at the top. I feel spoiled for choices. There are just too many amazing bosses for me to single out a second place. While we're at it, we can talk a bit about the base game bosses because my thoughts on a number of them have changed since I posted my original video. With the patch that came with Overture, I think there were changes made to how the AI on certain bosses work. I couldn't find anything about this in the patch notes, so I'm wary that this is going to make me sound insane, but it's something that I felt over the course of many death marches I put into making this video. Some of these changes aren't really a big deal, like the eldest of the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. In both iterations of the fight, occasionally panic rolling off the ground in such a way that looks like his animation is glitching out. Phase 1 Laxasia seems to try and fish for grabs way more often than before as well. Again, I don't really feel comfortable about declaring that these bosses were changed because I have no concrete evidence to back it up. Maybe some of the things I'm going to bring up are things these bosses have been doing already and I just happen to never notice or run into them. So now that we've put that little asterisk onto this part of the video, let's talk about Archbishop first. I've realized that I just don't like Archbishop that much. The Frog Demon side is okay, but the actual Archbishop side in Phase 2 is just not that fun. He's hovering high in the air for a fair amount of time, which makes punishing him annoying. He also screws with the camera a lot whenever he starts swinging side to side if you stand too close. Like I said in the original video, Phase 2 doesn't feel like its two halves are designed with each other in mind for the most part. As far as supposed AI changes go, the Frog Demon side has the 2 tongue attacks, an overhead attack, and a swipe. But sometimes he will start the windup for the overhead, but skip the overhead and do the swipe right away. I don't like this at all, and it started to get tremendously annoying throughout the death marches, because he basically now has the same telegraph for 2 different attacks. One change I do like though is that he seems to consistently do the big blue blast when he gets low, usually right after the first fatal, which is nice since it's a cool looking attack. Another boss that I've grown less and less fond of is Simon Manus. I used to think he was a pretty cool boss that operated on a different axis compared to most other bosses in the base game, but it turns out that Simon becomes a lot less cool when you have to run away or chase him around on low heels, and there's just a small but very real chance he point blanks you with his disruption projectiles and wipes 20 plus minutes of progress in an instant. Old iterations of Simon used to only do ranged attacks if you were far, far away, but with the DLC patch, it now seems like the restriction has been lifted. I really dislike this part about Simon now. All the running around that happens in Phase 2 has become quite the chore as well, especially when it comes after 20 to 25 minutes of fighting other bosses. It's one of those cases where even if I play well, sometimes Simon will just put up his disruption turret or cast the tracking blue slams, or the Hand of God will drop and there's nothing I can do besides run away. It's one of the rare instances in Lies of P where it feels like I don't have control over the fight, and that is a huge source of frustration for me. Speaking of the rare instances in Lies of P where it feels like I don't have control over the fight, Fuoco sucks. Fuoco sucks so bad. I can't believe this guy decided to be on his best behavior for one day on camera in the original video and then went back to his horrible ways afterwards. The melee moveset is all fine and well, I still enjoy that, but I have just about had it with all of the oil and fire and hopping around he does in Phase 2. I feel like I can never properly engage with the boss whenever there's oil on the ground because Fuoco likes to camp out in his oil puddles and I don't want to risk fighting next to a potential explosion. I don't think there were any AI changes with Fuoco, he just has a horrendously annoying Phase 2. Let's talk about Laxasia now. I was not a huge fan of this boss in the original video, and I continue to not be a huge fan of her in this one, especially now that Arlecchino has come out and has proven to me that you can make an exceptionally difficult boss that is entirely fun from start to finish. I have just grown sick and tired of Laxasia's shield in Phase 1. It's not something that can really be played around proactively, and it's more of a nuisance than a proper gimmick to the fight. You can break the shield, sure, but that's still tremendously annoying for many builds because you need to repeatedly have your attacks bounce off of it, and your attacks can still bounce off of what remains of the shield afterwards. The worst part is whenever a charged attack bounces off to deny you staggers. I can say the same about Phase 2 as well whenever Laxasia holds the shield and enters a counter state. If you swing into it, she kicks you in the face. Breaking her shield should just completely remove it from the fight, period. In general, I think I'm kind of sick of any counter states on bosses. It's not really that fun to sit and watch a boss stare at you. This is different from running away from an attack to avoid getting hit because I'm actually doing something while I'm waiting out an animation. These parry and counter states on bosses like Laxasia Phase 2 or the White Lady feel like the bosses randomly hit the pause button and I need to wait until things resume. It is a huge momentum killer for the fight. It just is not engaging to deal with. I made a big deal about this with the White Lady in the original video, and I still feel the same about that boss. Romeo also has a similar counter state, and I don't enjoy that attack either, even though the rest of the boss is pretty good. To switch games for a moment, the first Berserker, Kazan, has a boss that employs a counter mechanic in a way that I really like. Traka has an attack where she will hold up her umbrella and sit there. If you don't do anything, she drops the umbrella and moves on with her life, but if you hit the umbrella, she jumps away and does a swooping attack that demands you to use a special type of deflection that deals bonus damage and stagger, similar to guard parries in Lies of P. This kind of back and forth is something I really enjoyed and part of the reason why Traka was my favorite boss in Kazan by a huge margin. There's an actual choice you can make in whether or not you want to engage with the boss's counter state, and benefits to both options rather than the binary correct and incorrect ways to interact with the boss's counter states in Lies of P. If they want to add counter states to bosses in the sequel, then I think taking a page out of Traka's book would be great. We briefly mentioned Romeo, so let's talk about him a little bit more. I actually have a positive thing to say about boss AI changes for once, which is that Romeo will now consistently do his Fire Scythe combo when he hits half health. That tirade about King of Puppets in the original video was not for nothing, I suppose. It's an amazing change that makes it so you have to overcome an exceptionally difficult attack to defeat this boss. I felt like I didn't deserve my first few kills on Romeo because he didn't do the Fire Scythe combo on those attempts, and I always felt really bad about it. But now I can sleep peacefully. It does seem like Romeo does his red attacks much less now, which is a shame because they look sick and are fun to perfect guard, especially the drop kick in the phase 2 opener. I had really wanted to try and get good at perfect guarding Romeo's Fire Scythe combo, but I have come to terms with the fact that I might not be good enough to do this. Instead, I've started to treat his Fire Scythe combo as a sort of minigame where I have to try and time a stagger out of him to knock him out of the attack while he's lighting up the scythe, and I find this to be a lot of fun. And most importantly, of course, who could forget about him? They nerfed the shit out of Door Guardian. Rest in peace, big guy, you did good. In order to close out this video, let's do a little bit of wish listing for the sequel. As far as combat goes, there are 2 changes I would love to see. Nothing on the mechanical side of things, but 2 things to improve consistency. Number 1, no more damage ranges, please. I don't like damage ranges in any game. I don't like it in Pokemon, and I don't like it in Lies of P. It can make doing damage tests between different setups kind of a nuisance, since you always need to estimate how much damage you're working with at all times. Plus, it can sometimes result in needing to take an extra hit to kill an enemy that you normally kill in one hit because you low rolled. That actually happens in the original video where I was using the charged attack on the wrench baton against the basic carcass enemies on the way to the cathedral. Conversely, I've also had cases where I've hit an enemy out of a stagger because I high rolled too many hits and that ended up doing too much damage, causing me to lose out on a precious fatal attack. I would really like to see damage be standardized in the sequel. I don't think damage rolls add anything positive to the game. And number 2, a damage meter on staggered enemies. This point was inspired by my time playing the first Berserker, Kazan, which also has a deflect-based combat system. In that game, when you knock an enemy down, a small timer will appear on the enemy to show you how long you have left before the enemy gets back up and you miss your chance to perform Kazan's equivalent of fatal attacks. You're incentivized to unload as much damage as possible during this window, and figuring out a way to maximize my damage output in this window respective to my current weapon and skill tree choice was a lot of fun. You're incentivized to do something similar in Lies of P, but with the added change that enemies will get back up if you do too much damage during this time. While figuring out how much damage you can deal before the enemy can recover is an important part of weapon mastery, I also think a damage meter similar to Kazan's timer wouldn't be a bad idea. It would incentivize players to be as aggressive as possible during this window, but it would also lower the risk of both overdoing the damage and losing out on the fatal attack, or not dealing as much damage as you possibly could because you were scared of losing out on a fatal attack. As it stands, it is a fairly trial and error process, but it also doesn't have to be as demonstrated by Kazan. I didn't think I'd end up talking about Kazan twice in this video, but here we are. As far as other things on my wish list go, I'll repeat a few points from the original video. Gold coin fruit and wish stones should be streamlined or entirely reworked into a new system. I still really don't think there needs to be an extra layer of currency to interact with this system. Star fragments should just do everything that gold coin fruits currently do. No reason for a real-time system for acquiring these either, just make them obtainable for a very small amount of ergo or exchangeable with star fragments. I also think the system should be accessible much earlier in the game. For the few points in the story where gold coin fruit is specifically needed, just have the player obtain a few as key items throughout their playthrough instead, maybe as like quest rewards or something. You should be able to duplicate a few boss ergos throughout a run. It would be nice to be able to get both the amulet and the weapon for 2 or 3 boss ergos, without needing to go into a brand new game cycle. I think this is especially valuable on first playthroughs since weapon options tend to be more tantalizing on first runs, at least for me anyways. If the potential ergo gain from duplicating boss ergos is a balancing concern somehow, then just have only the item be granted instead. The slash and stab affinity on weapons and handles should probably be removed. The damage penalty that comes with matching together different affinities is sort of the last thing preventing me from just stapling together any blade with any handle. Yes, putting a pickaxe head on a jackhammer does look stupid, but that's kind of the whole point, isn't it? If the P organ will be a returning feature, it could continue to use a few more changes. I still think the reduced stamina consumption on dash upgrades should become a baseline feature. Healing upgrades should also be decoupled from the P organ to make them feel less mandatory. I still like my idea of getting an extra heal and a bit of healing potency for every X amount of quartz used, but I would also be okay with overworld pickups like in Elden Ring or Dark Souls 3. Maybe getting the upgrades on boss kills would be okay too. Lies of P doesn't have any persistent online functions, so I really don't see why this game can't have a pause button. I think even if it did have persistent online functions, it still should have a pause button as long as you aren't actively engaging with some sort of multiplayer system. I know that there's some exceptions like in speedrunning where people want to actively menu while on the go, but that could just be an option you toggle on or off in the settings. While I appreciate the game's linearity in several ways, I wouldn't mind if the sequel approached world design with a bit less linearity. I think Dark Souls 3's style of world design is a good sweet spot between expansive freedom and strict linearity. A moderate amount of well-designed optional areas and bosses alongside a few branching paths to let the player mix up the order a bit each time they play the game. The biggest upside to the game's linear world design was streamlining replayability, but if boss rushes and rematches will become a baseline addition in the sequel, which I hope they are, then I think a less streamlined level of main game replayability is a worthwhile exchange for improved exploration on first playthroughs. And then the final item on my wish list is an advanced descriptions setting. I would love it if there was an option in the settings to show proper numbers and details on certain items. For example, showing the exact percentage damage gain on things like the Arm of God and Conquering Amulets, the specific duration on certain Fable Arts, and even just lengthier descriptions on vague things like the Triumvirate Amulet or the Pinwheel Blade Fable Art. Offering concrete numbers and information on specific weapon gimmicks and amulets can inform build decisions and maybe even encourage people to try stuff they might not have considered before. Aside from just more clarity, it would once again make running damage tests a lot more straightforward and precise. And kind of related to this, some sort of in-game timer for duration-based Fable Arts would be nice. Something like a small ticking clock icon over the Fable Art graphic in the bottom right corner would be neat, I think. My time with Overture has skyrocketed my hopes for the sequel. I know it's not a great idea to be overly excited for something that hasn't come out yet because it's better to keep your expectations low and be pleasantly surprised rather than expecting a lot and being disappointed, but everything from the new weapons, the theming of the new levels, and especially the new bosses has me so curious to see what else the developers have in the tank. My first time playing Overture had me thinking that, yep, this certainly is more Lies of P, which is a great thing by the way, that's all that I could have asked for, but as more time has passed, the more I've grown to recognize Overture as the significant step up from the base game that it is, and when it comes time to play the sequel, I hope that I can find myself saying, yep, this certainly is more Overture. So, as Arlecchino is getting owned on the screen, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking it and maybe even subscribing to the channel, although my upload frequency over the last few years has been really bad, so I can't in good conscience actually recommend anyone to subscribe to the channel, but you know, it is just part of making videos in this day and age, but okay, whatever. Truth be told, I super duper procrastinated on this video. This video realistically probably could have been done months and months ago, but then I just got lazy at several different points. Anyways, because it's been months since I both wrote and recorded the script, I've had additional thoughts pop into my head since, so I'm just gonna start firing through them one after another and just flush them out of my system. The big one is the AI stuff. It's been like as of me recording this right now, it's been like a little over a month, I think, since people found out that the developers of Lies of P Round 8 put up a job posting for an AI creator. They did rename the job posting to something else later on, but the description still mentioned AI, I believe. So, obviously this sucks a lot. I don't think there's been further updates on the matter, nothing of major importance anyways. I went on a trip to South Korea last year to visit some family for a few weeks, and I recall the most astonishing takeaway from that trip for me was how prevalent AI was, not necessarily in terms of just how much AI generated content was being thrown around, but just how often AI was mentioned in so many places, from advertisements and descriptions. I remember going to a grocery store and they were advertising one of the fucking things in their produce aisle with AI. Round 8 is a Korean developer, by the way. That's the reason I'm bringing this up. So, coming from a Western perspective, I don't like seeing AI creep its way into what is now my all-time favorite game. Sorry, Sekiro, but Arlecchino is just like the goated boss fight. Even if the end product of the Lies of P sequel, whatever it ends up being called, only ends up using AI for concepting and repetitive assets like environmental textures or just like fucking planks of wood or whatever, that's still one step of the process now handled by a machine that doesn't understand what it's making, and it lacks the intentionality of a human touch. I've already heard anecdotes about how like stock image websites are basically fucking unusable in this day and age because it's just flooded with AI, and I wouldn't be surprised to find out that those publicly available assets that you can just use for your video games are headed in this. The providers for those assets are headed in the same direction. There's already been some controversy as allegations were thrown towards Overture about some AI-generated content being used for the randomly strewn paintings within the DLC. I don't believe these claims were ever substantiated, but they do exist nonetheless. From my westernized perspective, this all just it sucks to be stuck in the middle of. And it feels like one of those things where even if the anti-AI fans of the game talk about how much they don't like it, things will probably not change because of those cultural differences around that topic I mentioned earlier. Who knows how much of Lies of P2 will end up as a product of AI's unfeeling output, even if the end result is completely zero, like no AI generated content is in the game at all. That game has now been infected by the AI slop cooties and has now been forever ruined in the eyes of some, and I already can see the fucking tweets of people like witch hunting this game and just digging around for assets and pictures and just like pointing at everything and screaming AI at it. Like it's it's already a little too late. Like the damage has been done, I'm afraid. The best I can hope for is that Lies of P2 is made with as much human intent and effort as possible. It would be great if, they put out a proper statement that said like, hey, we'll address this drama and assure you that AI will not be making it into the product, but I already know that's not going to be good enough for some people. God, what an optimistic way to start this outro, isn't it? Anyways, back to the actual game stuff. I'm recording this right now. I have no idea if the like Arlecchino getting his ass kicked and like the post-credits scene, how much of that has played. But thankfully, I have like a shit ton of footage from me feeding deaths to difficulty 5 Arlecchino, so I'll just run more of that in the background while we do this. So let's talk about like stuff actually relevant to the game now. Well, the content of the game, that is. So I never talked about why I picked all the weapons I did for the DLC boss rematches. There was intention. All those weapons were picked very intentionally. So I wanted to show off the Crescent Glaive and the Etiquette, since I talked about how much I like those weapons in the first video without ever showing them off. I had to use the Lumacchio fit to rep my king, of course, during the Markiona rematch to go alongside the etiquette. Which, by the way, that Markiona rematch, it is insane how close that rematch was on the successful attempt. The last 3-ish minutes of the Markiona section are all from the final attempt, minus the very tasteful large arena joke. And there was one time that I would have died had I not perfect deflected or backflip, and another time where I almost died in the 1v1 against Markiona. The level 5 Markiona fight only took me 24 minutes to do somehow, which is insane to me since she's still the hardest fight in the DLC to me. Anyways, the last note about the etiquette is that the etiquette and Lumacchio now existing together in the same game only makes it even weirder that you can't get Veronique's hammer. The Salamander Dagger Lorenzini Bolt for Guardian is pretty easy to explain. It's a fire blade against a Carcass boss, and the Guardian fight is like the only place in the game where you can reliably have enough runway to make proper use of the charged running attack, especially since he perfectly sets you up for it every time with the phase 2 anchor drop explosion. And while we're on the subject of Anguished Guardian, let me throw in one final addendum that I can't believe I never thought to write in the original script. Guardian has his own unique fatal attack, and it looks awesome. It is a little janky with P dangling in the air for a moment, but whatever, man, it's still pretty cool. I seriously hope they consider doing more of these for bosses in the sequel. They did it here with Phase 2 Arlecchino if you have Leia summoned, and that one's pretty good too. Makes me wish the tracker got one for Overseer. I don't think every boss should have it, because typically you get several fatal attacks off over the course of a boss fight, and I think it would get really old really fast. Guardian works perfectly for a special fatal because you generally only ever fatal attack him once over the course of a fight, maybe twice on the rare occasion. So the animation isn't constantly being thrown at your face. Having some special ones for the big important fights in the sequel would be really, really nice. Lastly, the Great Sword of Fate on the Salamander Dagger for the Arlecchino rematch. That one is also super easy to explain. That was the weapon I used to beat Overture on release. In preparation for Overture's release, I had my plans very carefully laid out. I wanted to go into the DLC with a boring ass weapon and beat the game with just that so that I could experience all of the bosses in the quote-unquote fairest way possible. No fancy fablers or gimmicks, just a boring, plain weapon that would let the bosses flex their muscles to their fullest. I thought about some other weapons, but the Great Sword Dagger was what I ended up settling on because I really like this combination. So going back and beating level 5 Arlecchino with the same weapon I beat him on my first playthrough was really cool. It was really hard, but really cool nonetheless. I think I was initially going to use the Pale Knight, but I ended up switching to it at the last minute, and I'm happy that I did. Next up is a bunch of things I really appreciate about the game that I've realized over the months. Doing an Elden Ring randomizer made me realize just how janky some fights can get when the arena isn't on a nice and flat surface. Some attacks hit you when they shouldn't, and some attacks miss you when they shouldn't, and just being on a nice flat arena where you can't fall to your death makes fights super consistent. So thank you to Lies of P for making sure all important bosses are nice and flat and closed off arenas. I cannot tell you how fucking annoying it is when you're trying to fight Malekith in Margit's arena and you just keep rolling off the edge and dying. God. I really appreciate that all boss ergos can be exchanged for a weapon or an amulet so that there's always something of value to every player. Another shout out to weapons not needing stat requirements, one of the best decisions in the game. It's just so nice that pretty much every attack in the game is so readable and easy to understand. Markiona's duet spin move with her arch puppet is genuinely the only thing I can think of in the whole game where I don't really know what's happening or how to properly respond to it. Sometimes attacks can be unreadable because of camera issues, but those don't happen frequently enough for me to really knock it against the game, and it's, let's be real, it's not like this is the only game with camera issues in boss fights. Having hard to read attacks can really take the steam out of certain fights and sometimes even warps the entire fight around these attacks you can't read. Stuff like some Elden Ring examples again. The follow-up light beams and after image clones in Concert of Dawn Phase 2, or the poison breath from Valiant Gargoyles. I seriously can't fucking believe double Gargs made it into the final cut of Elden Ring in the state that they exist in. So bad. They also added some lovely quality of life changes with the patch that introduced the DLC. They made it so you could level without going back to the hotel. records can be played right away without needing to set up the gramophone every time. The music will just start playing once you load into the hotel. You can cash in or go from the level up screen without tabbing in and out of extra menus. I also found out that you can bind the jump to a dedicated key, so you don't have to do that like weird just like choking down your sprint button to properly get a jump off. Like, I don't know if that was there the whole time, but like, oh my god, it felt so good that I could just roll out of a sprint now instead of just jumping. God. I'm sure there's more quality of life changes with the DLC update that I never noticed. There just might be too much. They're like, maybe this game's kind of good. But here is one complaint though. I really don't like that bosses have resistances to elements, I should specify. It just makes certain fights with certain weapons feel horrible, especially on higher difficulty rematches, as if those rematches weren't already hard enough. Watchmen is kind of the big culprit here. The game leading up to Scrapped Watchmen has heavily signaled that electric damage is good against puppets, what with the electric abrasives and throwing cells at the merchant right before Parade Master, or the coil stick being available midway through Elysian Boulevard. Yet when it comes to fight the Watchman, he's really resistant to electric. Like, yeah, in hindsight it makes sense that the boss with like lightning attacks is resistant to electric, but it still breaks the logic the game has been working with up to that point. I don't mind boss weaknesses as another one of those extra built-in difficulty levers, but the resistance just feels bad in a way that isn't challenging or fun. The DLC thankfully doesn't have anything as extreme as Scrapped Watchmen and Fuoco being mega resistant to electric and fire respectively, and I hope it stays that way in the sequel. Going on to do a little bit of wish listing, mostly just a continuation of some stuff I mentioned in the original video. A built-in enemy and item randomizer would be nice as another method of replaying the game, especially if they come with extra challenge options like auto-equipping or inventory lock. I did a Dark Souls 3 randomizer with auto-equip and inventory lock, and it was horrible, but also so much fun and chaos at the same time. I think Lies of P would be a great candidate for something like this because of the weapon combination system, meaning that your handle or blade could change at any given time, but the lack of a stat requirement would mean that you would never be in like a truly horrible position with an unusable weapon outside of being suddenly forced into like fat rolling. And online features, I guess I wouldn't mind online features. I don't much care for invasions or PvP in the FromSoft games. I don't summon other players either, and I can't see myself really caring for these kinds of systems in Lies of P either, should they be implemented. But when Shadow of the Erdtree first came out, I spent a good couple days after beating the DLC putting summon signs down in front of a lot of the DLC bosses, and I had fun helping other people kill bosses, and I think I could see myself enjoying that here too. Messages are also always a good time. So, as far as the addendums, that's all of the ones I've written down. Once I click upload on this video, 2 days afterwards, I will probably think of 5 other things that I just somehow forgot again, but that's just the case with any video I ever make. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for watching. This video was grossly overdue, but it's done now. The next video will be on whatever it ends up being on, and it will come out whenever it comes out. I have some ideas. Ideas, I say, most of them will manifest into anything. I have some things I want to check out, but I don't know if any of those are going to be converted into videos. But so you know what, the video will come out whenever it needs to come out. So, God, I'm so bad. Shit. Okay, yeah, that's it for real this time. The Audacity readout is telling me this outro is over 16 minutes long, which is insane. That's probably the longest one I've ever done for any one of these videos. So yeah, thank you so much, and I will see you whenever the hell next time is.